The House Committee and Appropriations Subcommittees on Article 1, 4, and 5 will come to order. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Gonzalez.
Present.
Vice Chair Spiller.
Here.
Representative Allison.
Here.
Representative De Ayala.
Here.
Representative Johnson.
A quorum is present. Members, welcome to Article 1, 4, and 5 Subcommittee. I'd like to thank Chairman Bonin for reappointing me as chair, and as I look forward to working with each of you as we move through the budget process. I'd like to start off with a couple of introductions. First, I want to introduce my vice chair, Representative David Spiller. And Representative Spiller, I don't know if you have any words you want to share.
I would just like to say I appreciate the opportunity, the opportunity to work with you and under your leadership and guidance and the other good folks on the committee. Look forward to it and look forward to a good session. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd also like to welcome Representatives Allison, De Ayala, and Jarvis Johnson to this committee. We're really excited. A whole new 145, so lots of new faces. Lastly, and most importantly, I'd like to recognize John Montgomery, who is our budget analyst for our subcommittee. He is brilliant and knowledgeable, and you should not hesitate to ask him any questions because he's been working on this for a very long time. Basically started when he was 12. So today we will hear testimony from the LBB and Article 1 agencies relating to general government. Public testimony will be taken for all Article 1 agencies at the end of invited testimony. Prior to testifying, it is required that every witness fill out an electronic witness affirmation form that can be done on the kiosk located outside the hearing room. For those of you testifying before the committee, always begin your comments, as you know, by stating your name and the organization you represent. The material provided by invited testimony have been electronically shared with members and their staff and available on the subcommittee website. Are there any members who would like to comment or add anything before we proceed? Great. All right. So first we'll start with item 3 on the agenda. Yes. Item 3 on the agenda, the chair calls Harrison Gregg, analyst with the LBB. Please state your name and the organization for the record.
Good morning. My name is Harrison Gregg. I am with the Legislative Budget Board, and I will be presenting the summary of budget recommendations for the Office of the Attorney General. Starting on page 1 of your packet, recommendations for the House introduced bill include $1.3 billion in all funds, which is a $7.8 million decrease from the current biennium. Please turn to page 2 of your packet. In this section, we have a breakdown of funding changes for the agency. Items A through E will be discussed later in section 3. There are a few other funding changes in this section that I want to briefly highlight. Item H identifies a reduction of $2.9 million in general revenue and $5.6 million in federal funds that is related to a swap for additional federal incentives that are anticipated to collect to the Child Support Retained Collections account. Please turn over to page 3. Also of note is item L, which includes a decrease of $14.3 million in appropriated receipts due to a projected decrease in collections from court costs and attorney's fees. Please turn over to page 4. On page 4, we have selected fiscal and policy issues. The first item concerns crime victims' compensation dedicated account 469. For a number of years, the Crime Victims Compensation Account has been seeing a decline in collected revenues from court costs. This decline between fiscal years 2016 and fiscal year 2022 has seen an average of about 5.1% per year in decline. The OAG estimated in their legislative appropriations requests that if current funding levels out of the account were maintained through 24-25, the remaining balances of the account would sit at about $21 million at the end of the biennium. Recommendations for the Office of the Attorney General include $109.4 million out of Fund 469 for the 24-25 biennium, which is a $43.3 million decrease from the current biennium. This decrease is the result of a $16 million method of finance swap for federal funds within the crime victims strategy and $28.4 million method of finance swap for general revenue within the victims assistance strategy. Additionally, a method of finance swap for general revenue has been included in the introduced bill at HHSC. It is anticipated that the implementation of these swaps will resolve the solvency issue with the account. Moving on to item 2, which is near the bottom of the page, we have a discussion of a similar solvency issue relating to the sexual assault program dedicated account, or Fund 5010. Recommendations include $32.4 million out of Fund 5010 for the 24-25 biennium for victims assistance grants. Recommendations also include the addition of a rider that, contingent upon the passage of relevant legislation, would enable for the fee assessed on sexually oriented businesses to be set and adjusted within the General Appropriations Act. Please turn over to page 6 of your packet. Item 3 concerns victims assistance grants. Recommendations include $95.3 million in funding for victims assistance grants in the upcoming biennium, which is a $14.7 million increase from the current biennium. This increase is primarily driven by a $14 million increase in general revenue for items related to rape crisis centers. This includes $9 million in funding for addressing the current projected wait list for counseling of adult sexual assault survivors and sexual assault advocacy services at rape crisis centers. $4 million for a pilot program that aims to support challenges faced in rural and border communities, and $1 million for a grant to implement a centralized training technical assistance and evaluation program for rape crisis centers across the state. Moving on to item 4, which is at the bottom of the page, we have outside counsel for Google litigation. As part of the 22-23 GAA, $43.2 million was appropriated to the Office of the Attorney General for outside legal contracts related to antitrust litigation against Google. According to the Office of the Attorney General, the case is currently proceeding to discovery, and a trial is expected to start at some point in 2024. The agency has expended $2 million in fiscal year 22 and anticipates that all remaining funds will not be expended by the end of the current biennium. Recommendations do not include the agency's request to amend the agency's Rider 32 to allow the agency to carry forward unexpended balances from the original $43.2 million appropriation for outside legal contracts that was made in the current biennium. Please turn to page 7 of your packet. Here we have item 5, which concerns the Child Support IT Modernization Project. Phase 2 of the project was provided funding in the 22-23 biennium at a total of $47.3 million in capital project cost. According to the Office of the Attorney General, the project is on time and within budget. Recommendations do not include the agency's requested $53 million in capital funding for phase 3 of the project. Please turn to page 8. Page 8 includes a summary of federal funds. Federal funds estimates for the 24-25 biennium are estimated at a net decrease of $0.9 million from the 22-23 biennium. Please turn to page 9. On page 9, we have rider highlights. There are several highlights I want to call your attention to in particular. Recommendations include the amendment of Rider 7 to include language requiring the agency to track revenue, allocations, and expenditures related to appropriated receipts in USAS, also known as the Uniform Statewide Accounting System. Recommended modifications to Rider 9 include the addition of the $14 million in GR for matters related to rape crisis centers, and the addition of language that break down the additional general revenue that is to be allocated. Please turn to page 10. There are a few more rider highlights I want to mention. These include the recommended rider deletions, which there are 3 of them. The first of these recommendations is the removal of Rider 32, which relates to the outside legal contract for litigation against Google, which I previously mentioned. Deletions also include the removal of Rider 33, which concerns the T2 project. And the last of the recommended deletions is the removal of Rider 34, which concerns the appropriation of GR to be deposited into both Fund 469 and Fund 5010. The original appropriation was intended to be one time, thus the recommended removal of the rider. Recommendations also include the addition of 2 new riders. The first of these riders is Rider 37, which relates to the unexpended balance authority that the agency has to carry forward federal asset forfeitures between biennia. The other is Rider 38, which is a contingency rider that, if relevant legislation passes, would allow the fee assessed on sexually oriented businesses to be set within the General Appropriations Act. Please turn to page 11. In section 5, we have a listing of the agency's requested exceptional items and rider revisions. These requests total to about $150.6 million in all funds. And these include items such as targeted salary increase for certain staff, which includes Assistant Attorney Generals, finance staff, and IT staff, as well as additional funding for the Criminal Investigations Division for additional FTEs, supplies, as well as capital project costs. And that will conclude my remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Harrison. Members, do you have any questions? We might ask you to come back after we hear from the Attorney General, but for now, we'll ask you to wait for now. The chair calls the Honorable Ken Paxton, Attorney General of Texas, and Brent Webster, First Assistant Attorney General. Sure you know the routine. Please state your name.
Didn't even look like a mic. Ken Paxton, Texas Attorney General. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Chairman Gonzalez and Chairman Spiller, and for the other two of you. Spent 10 years sitting right where you are. Congratulations on getting to do that for a while. For the record, again, I'm Attorney General Ken Paxton. First, I sincerely appreciate all the work and thought you've all put into this important process. I certainly know how much work that is, given that I was here for 10 years. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with all of you today to discuss our agency's budget. As the state's chief legal officer, it is my agency's mission to champion liberty and justice for Texas. The Office of the Attorney General is committed to performing its duties with excellence to accomplish all of its assigned duties and responsibilities. Our agency's core functions are, first, defending the state of Texas and its duly enacted laws. Second, serving the children of Texas through the enforcement of the state's child support. Third, securing justice for Texans by investigating and prosecuting criminal activities. Fourth, protecting Texans by enforcing consumer protection and antitrust laws. And finally, safeguarding the freedoms of Texans as guaranteed by the United States and Texas constitutions and the sovereignty of Texas. Today, my office is currently litigating over 38,000 cases. In courts, and Mono, that's a lot of cases, just so you know. In courts throughout the state, my employees represent our state, our agencies, and its officials. It is important to note that in providing these services to the state, that OAG is both a substantial source of revenue and, secondly, provides cost savings for the state. In the last 2 years alone, the civil litigations divisions have recovered almost $1 billion to general revenue. During my 8 years in office, the number is well in excess of $2 billion. My office also funds the Jack Pope Act to an average of about $20 million per year. And most of the agency's work is actually defense work. My office has successfully defended against many potential multi-million-dollar lawsuits, saving the state's taxpayers literally billions of dollars. You have heard of these cases: Medicaid 115 waiver, school finance, Hazelwood, Southwest Royalties, Amazon, and MFAR. Each of these lawsuits were potential budget busters, and it is impossible to predict when cases like these are going to occur. The OAG's legal divisions raise substantially more revenue than they require to operate. As an example, in 2021, we brought in over $427 million, and last year we brought in over $548 million, which is significantly more than our operating budget of about $120 million. This committee and this legislative body has recognized the need to invest in our state employees, and I want to thank you for the inflationary 5% salary increase in fiscal years 2024 and 2025 for all of our staff. Regarding victims assistance grants, I am thankful to you for adding an additional $7 million annually for both fiscal years 2024 and 2025 and replacing the funding source with general revenue. OAG's LAR was thoughtfully prepared. We have 6 exceptional items in total. I'd like to go through those. First, and most importantly, the OAG's attorneys, information technology, and finance employees are 3 of the agency's most strategic populations, facing significant economic pressures from the labor market. As such, the OAG is requesting an additional targeted 12% salary increase for them. For example, in 2021, the overall average salary for Texas lawyers was approximately $150,000. In Austin, lawyer pay is even higher. During fiscal year 2021, the average salary for our assistant attorney generals was $97,700. Economic pressures, including higher salary options, have eroded the OAG's competitive advantage and caused attorney general turnover to grow from 13.8% during fiscal year 2020 to 24.9% in fiscal year 2022. I'm confident that these targeted increases will ensure OAG has the ability to recruit and retain the professionals that have continually performed the work that you have come to rely on. Second, OAG has also entered into a consortium to litigate against Google, and it is taking place on multiple fronts. These large-scale litigation efforts come with their own set of needs, and we appreciate the support we received from the legislature in these litigation efforts. Additionally, the OAG Criminal Investigations Division both investigates and prosecutes crime. In 2022 alone, the OAG's Child Exploitation Unit received over 20,000 cyber tips and referrals for investigation, and this number, unfortunately, seems to continue to grow exponentially. We are also requesting additional resources for the following IT projects. First, Child Support IT Modernization Project Phase 3. Second, Legal Case Modernization. And third, Agency Mainframe Decommissioning. Lastly, we request consideration to extend the funding received in last session's supplemental appropriations bill for IT projects through August 31st, 2023. Currently, appropriations expire mid-June for these projects, creating a gap in the project and stalling momentum on these crucial projects. This concludes my brief overview of the agency's budgetary request. I appreciate the opportunity to have made this presentation and look forward to working with this committee. I also have with me my first assistant, Brent Webster. I brought others, including our Chief Financial Officer, Michelle Price. So if there are questions that need more detail, I've got people here to answer those questions. So,
Thank you so much. Members, are there any questions?
One quick one. The Google litigation. I understand that's slower. It's proceeding slower than anticipated because there was some multi-court litigation or multi-district. You can explain a little bit of that?
sure, and I'll have Brent add on to what I say, but yeah, we were on a pretty fast track in Texas, and then because there were copycat lawsuits, they pulled us into a multi-district litigation, which we had no choice, and they moved us to New York, which has significantly slowed down the project because we have more lawyers involved, more cases. There was a new law just passed, and it allows now states to control their venue on cases like this. So we're in this process now of trying to figure out, do we stay in the multi-district litigation or we pull it back to Texas? So that's been a challenge because it slows down. You'll notice that the Department of Justice filed almost the exact case that we filed 2 years after we did. So it is a little bit encouraging to see that the Department of Justice just recently in the last month filed almost the exact case that we had filed 2 years prior. If this case weren't a very good case, I don't think you'd see Department of Justice copying our case. Brent, you want to add anything?
I would also add that we did have a big win in Google tried to get our case dismissed in New York, and the New York judge ruled in our favor, which was a substantial movement in this case. So there have been major things that have occurred to keep this case moving.
And I should add, we do have 3 other cases against Google, so this is not the only one. And they're all relatively significant as far as dollar, and my prediction is the numbers that you've seen from us are going to continue to increase because of the size of litigation that we're dealing with.
But here, from a funding standpoint, it's not more funds. We're not spending the funds we had as quickly as we thought we was going to spend because of the slowness in the case in New York.
That's exactly right.
Thank you.
Representative, I do have a couple of questions on the Google lawsuit. When it came to the Google lawsuit, there was a cost-sharing component with other states. Is that correct?
Go ahead, Jess.
We're in the process of negotiating that cost-sharing agreement with the other states right now. In this particular case, Texas, under General Paxton's leadership, developed the facts of this case, conducted an internal investigation for 2 years before filing the case. So the work product and most of the work was brought on through Texas. And so many of these states joined us at a time when they hadn't done a lot of work on the case. And so now they are a part of the case, and they have been over the last 2 years. But the bulk of the work and the bulk of the actual discovery, the smoking gun emails we discovered, the evidence we discovered, was done by Texas. Now, we are in the process of negotiating that cost-sharing agreement, and we will get that to, once that's executed, we're going to get it to all the legislators.
But for right now, Texas has been the only state to spend any money. In fact, our taxpayers are really compensating the other states' involvement in this.
So with litigation like this, we're going to win this case. And when we do win this case, either through a settlement or through trial, the state of Texas costs will be paid first. And then the payout will occur. So in litigation like this, the costs get paid back first. And so any investment we make in this case will be paid back to the state.
And what is the timeline for your cost-sharing agreement with the other states?
We're in the process of discussing that right now. One of the big issues is we're actually trying to bring this case back to Texas quicker, and that may affect some of the cost sharing. So if we get the case back to Texas faster, we get to trial faster, which means we're discussing either, if we're going to trial, there's a higher chance of discussing a settlement. We get to trial, we win this case, the money comes in faster. So our number one priority right now that we have successfully gotten this bill passed in the U.S. Congress, is to try and find a way to get this case back on Texas ground.
So how much money have you already spent?
I would have to defer to our controller, Ms. Price.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Price. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at the Attorney General's Office. We expended $2 million in fiscal year 2022 and about $1 million so far in fiscal year 2023 for a total of $3 million.
So a total of 3 of the appropriated 43 million?
That is correct.
And of the 3 you've already spent, where did that predominantly go to? And for the remainder that you want to have some authority to carry over, how much do you think will be spent on outside counsel and or consultants?
So the amount that we have spent of the $3 million, I would say, I have the exact numbers if you want to bear with me while I look them up, or I can.
Or you can just give me roundabout numbers. I'm sure those are in your head, yeah.
It's I would say about 1/3 for outside counsel, 2/3 for our consultants. This is a very highly intensive consultant litigation. And so moving forward, we are anticipating, based on how the case is looking right now, the bulk of the cost will be in experts in compiling the information, assuming it goes to trial and there is not a settlement. So again, I expect that trend to move forward at about 2/3, 1/3.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Spiller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So previously, I think you said that y'all have about 38,000 cases pending. I'm assuming that the vast majority of those are child support related cases, or?
Actually, I don't think that's true. Chris or Brent, you can know the breakdown. I don't think it's.
I believe when we talk about the 38,000, that it usually involves, and again, that's a rounded number. My understanding is that involves our civil litigation and our criminal cases combined.
Okay.
Child support is a separate bucket, and I believe there's probably millions.
Yeah, I think we have about 1.6 million. We have our child support director here. She could answer the exact number, but I think about 1.6 million child support cases, and those 38,000 are, for the most part, not related.
Okay, and aside from the Google case, how do you do most of the things that you handle? You do it in-house or with the attorneys that you have present, or
Yeah, so these technology cases were very complicated. I knew that we needed help. I mean, I went to Palo Alto. I spent a lot of time in California with technology experts, lawyers, trying to understand what was going on in the world, because I'm not a technology expert, even though I had a background in it. Things change so fast, and these guys are operating at breakneck speed of changing things. We had to have outside expertise to understand the case and to have this proceed forward. But yeah, generally, a high percentage of our cases are done in-house.
Okay, but some of these you bring in outside counsel, in particular with regard to Google. I think you said you're negotiating a contract with them, but is that typically, and when you do agreements with outside counsel, is it typically based on an hourly rate? Is it some contingency? Is it a hybrid?
So there's a statute in Texas that controls what might be construed as a contingency, but what it is they're billing hourly, and they get paid on the back end for those hours billed. There's a multiplier involved for those contingency fee contracts. In the Google case, the lawyers have come on at a percentage cap, and we followed the statute to a T on this. So each law firm has a percentage cap, and then they do bill hourly, but they can only recover what they've actually billed on the back end. And then that amount is capped by that percentage of the entire case.
Okay, and so when you're looking at a case, especially a bigger case, that you do forecasting or budgeting and so forth about what your anticipated costs are going to be, those type things, and likewise, on the other end, if you're successful, presumably there'll be some sort of recovery, and what your range of recovery or something like that might be.
So in these situations, for example, one of the law firms we've partnered with in Google case has agreed to cover some of our expert costs. So they kind of can function as a force multiplier for us, so that we're able to continue to bring more cases. That's partly why we like this type of structure. but their recovery would be capped at a percentage, and that percentage is not. They don't get a percentage of the recovery. They get what they build. So if they build over the life of the case 1,000 hours, they would get paid for those 1,000 hours, and if they didn't reach the cap, then that's all they would get. But if they build 1,000 hours, but that was more than the percentage cap, well, they would only get whatever the percentage cap was.
Okay. And I may have misunderstood, but as far as I understood, when we talk about what you're asking in the Google case, basically 19.8 million, but that's a one-time thing. Are we looking at coming in, 2 years from now and asking for additional funds on that, or are you saying that you think the 19.8 or whatever would be sufficient to get you through what you need to, or if you know?
Through this biennium, right now, as it stands, we finished discovery, I believe, at the end of 2024, which our hope then is that we go to trial at the beginning of 2025. Now, we hope to move that timeline up if we can by getting back to Texas, but if we can't, then we're looking at probably a 2025 trial. So our hope is to finish it before this biennium ends, and then bring a lot of money back to the state. But if that happens, God forbid, for some reason, then we'll obviously come back and we'll try to be good stewards of that money the same way we were the last 2 years.
And when you recover monies, and forgive me because I don't know, do those, when you receive funds on any case, were those tendered or were they transferred, or they remain with y'all, or they go to the comptroller?
Excellent question. We produce substantially more money than we cost. So the last fiscal year, we brought in $548 million to general revenue. So that we cost the state, I believe it's 160 million. So and that's also historically it's ranged from 170 million a year to 270 million a year. But in the last biennium, the last 2 fiscal years, we've doubled that amount. So 2021, we brought in 427, which is almost double what we brought in the year before. And this last fiscal year, we brought in 548. So we're pretty proud of the money we're bringing in for the state right now, and it's unprecedented historically for our agency.
Okay. Let's skip back. Turn back to the salary increase, the targeted salary increases and this is all what you're asking for is in addition to what is proposed in HB1. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So you've got targeted salary increases of $13 million. That, as I understand it, the way it's listed here, that there's 5% built in to this, and this is another 12% in addition to that, which my math would be 17%. Is that correct?
That's correct. So one of the arguments I've made to the legislature is, we struggle at our office to keep attorneys because of literally other agencies. University of Texas can come in and double our salaries, and we're a profit center for the state. So I've always said, you give me good attorneys, and I will bring in more money. And I think the last 2 years have demonstrated that theory, and that number I believe is getting better, not worse. But if I keep losing talented attorneys because everybody's paying more, there's no way I can deliver. So it's kind of a penny wide, a pound foolish if we're not investing in the people that can actually produce. Unlike most agents, we can actually provide income to the state, a lot of it. And I think the potential is these technology cases are potentially large,
Okay.
very large.
All right. And some of the other requests additional requests that you have that have been referenced had to do with a lot. It sounds like computer systems and IT related matters. Are those typically, you think? It looked like there were some that would be ongoing costs, but a lot of it would be upfront costs, one-time charges.
Yeah, if I remember right, most of it, 125 million, is upfront. Then it's done. And I feel better about our IT program than I have for years. We finally unloaded something that had been going on well before I got there, and we've focused on I think a better approach.
Okay. I believe that's all the questions. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Spiller. I do have some questions based on what Representative Spiller was asking. You say that staff is leaving to go to other agencies. How much more are they getting paid at other agencies? And are you doing any type of exit interviews that you can say that with definitive understanding?
Yeah, so I don't have all the details. I can just give you an example. So I had the head of my general litigation. This happened a couple of years ago. We were paying $185. So he's one of my top people at the time. the University of Texas hired him to be general counsel. He made 360. Now he's making, I think, in the 400s. And then he came over and cherry-picked some of our best litigators. So that's the struggle. I feel like we should have the best attorneys. University of Texas can almost double our salaries, and other agencies have also cherry-picked away. You've got an example of one that we lost in transportation. I think it was transportation.
We lost one of our top lawyers to the Department of Motor Vehicles for more money. We weren't able to compete with that, and so I mean, it's hard to lose one of our trial lawyers. It's a great agency, but to lose them to the DMV was kind of a blow, and not to be able to compete financially with that was hard.
And I hear these, qualitative stories. I think what I'm asking for is you're saying there's this gap, and you're asking Appropriations to give you more money. And I'm curious if you're doing any exit interviews to show data that demonstrates that people are leaving because of a pay gap or leaving the agency for other reasons.
So we've actually had our controller look at that, and so when I asked Michelle Price to come up and she can answer that, she said we have been looking at the data.
Hi.
Sorry, Ms.
Backing up.
Price,
I
thank you.
don't have all of the data from our exit surveys, but we had a very interesting remark in our legislative appropriations request. The percentage of OAG employees citing better pay as a reason for leaving has nearly doubled from 18.4% in FY 2021 to 35% in FY 2022. In addition, more agencies are leaving for jobs that will pay them greater than $75,000 per year. In FY 2021, 17% of separating employees said that they were leaving for a job that would pay them greater than $75,000 per year.
If you don't mind sharing any data regarding the exit interviews, I just feel like if you're going to ask the committee for millions of dollars, that we have a firm understanding. We want you to keep your staff, but we also want to know if the finances is the only reason that they're leaving.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We will get that to your committee as soon as possible.
I appreciate you. Thank you. I have a couple of other questions, General Paxton. So for the last few years, the House has really committed to making sure that we're paying our crime victims. There was a recent story that talked about the length of time it took for crime victims to see the support that they needed. What is the average time that crime victims are having to wait to get the payments from the Attorney General's office when they have been declared to get something from the Attorney General's office?
Yeah.
I don't have the average time on hand. We have, as a result, a lot of things that have occurred over the last year. We've looked at a lot of the delays, and some of the delays come from the process the legislature requires the crime victims to go through. First of all, they have to secure a receipt, and that receipt has to be for something that the statute allows them to reimburse for. So many times people come in, ask for reimbursement for something the statute does not allow them to be reimbursed for. That can cause a delay. And then also obtaining the receipts can also cause a delay. But I don't have the data on that delay offhand right now. I can get that to you.
I would like to know the average, and if there is delays, what is a common reason for delays? I mean, a lot of these crime victims, if you hear their stories, they're very life-changing in not the positive ways. We want to be responsive to their struggles, and so, yes. A little bit about a couple questions. Recently, there obviously was the whistleblower case. Can you give me some information? Can you inform the committee the terms of your settlement with the plaintiffs in the whistleblower case, and what specifically around the financial component of it?
So we've actually brought Chris Hilton here. He's been our lead employment lawyer that has been involved in that discussion, and we're going to let him respond to that question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris Hilton. I'm the chief of our general litigation division. Representatives, thank you for having me. The key monetary term of the settlement is a total of $3.3 million to settle the case with all four plaintiffs. There are some non-monetary terms that were agreed to in order to get the deal done, but that is the key monetary term.
So, the key monetary term is the $3 million.
$3.3 million.
$3.3 million. And so is the Attorney General's office going to asking for the state to pay the $3.3 million?
Under the Whistleblower Act, the agency, the Office of the Attorney General, is the proper defendant. And so under state law, because the agency is a defendant, that money needs to be specifically appropriated by the legislature. And my understanding is that typically is handled through the miscellaneous claims process.
And if the legislature decides not to do the $3.3 million, what happens then?
Because this is pending litigation, I don't want to get into too many specific, until the dismissals are filed and everything is done, it is still pending, and so I don't want to get into too many specifics. The agreement itself is contingent on legislative funding. It's a settlement that we made in order to save money for the state of Texas. It was the prudent thing to do to minimize litigation risk, and so for that reason, it is a settlement that's in the interest of the state.
But how much has the state already spent on the defense in the whistleblower case?
The defense of this case is necessarily costly. We have to use outside counsel for it because of conflicts issues, given that the defendant is the law firm of the state of Texas. So because we've had to use outside counsel, my understanding is that we've spent close to $600,000 so far defending the case. That's one of the reasons why the $3.3 million actually represents a number that saves money for the state over, compared to litigating the case to final judgment. It would just be a very costly case to defend.
I'm sure there are more questions about this in the future, but that's all I have for now. Representative Jarvis?
Good morning. Following up on Chairwoman's question, is that it takes legislative power in order to have the $3.3 million paid out, correct? So that's the vote of the body.
That's correct. So under the GAA, there is a $250,000 cap, essentially, whereby agencies can settle litigation without having to come back to the legislature. The majority of employment cases, which my division and other divisions handle, are well below that cap, and so that's something that this body would never see or hear about. There are also, settlements with our university clients are typically paid out of local funds, and so those, again, are settlements that the legislature would typically not have insight into. But here, because the defendant is the state's law firm, and the $250,000 cap per case was exceeded, that's why legislative appropriation is required.
So again, if this legislative body does not vote to pay that, then what would be the next steps? What will happen then? Without having to go into the details of the case, just simply trying to figure out what happens then.
And again, because it's pending litigation, I don't want to get into too many details. Under the terms of the settlement, it is contingent upon all necessary approvals. We've currently, stayed the case with the Texas Supreme Court, where we've been litigating it. Let them know that we've settled, but that it is contingent on approvals. So, it's difficult to predict exactly what would happen. But, I think that's about as far as I can go, just because the case is still pending.
So in respect to that, to General Paxson, then is the case, and I understand what you're going to say, but I'm just trying to get some clarity. Is the case against the state of Texas, or is it against General Paxson?
The case is against the state of Texas, and that's true of any Whistleblower Act employment case. That's the law that this body passed. I think it was first enacted in the 80s. It was last touched in 1993, and it's very clear that the agency is the proper defendant. In every single whistleblower case, you have a situation where the so-called whistleblowers are talking about the acts of one or a few specific employees, but the entity is always the defendant. So that's true of every whistleblower case.
So in respect to that, going back to the original question then, if in fact that the state, this body does not vote for it, General Paxson, would you be willing to pay for it out of your campaign account?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for the Attorney General. I'll just say that there is no whistleblower case where any individual has paid anything because the individual is not liable under the terms of the statute. Also, under the terms of the settlement, there is no admission of fault or liability or wrongdoing by any party, which is typical for settlements for these type of claims. The reason for this settlement is...
But there was fault found, though. That's why the Supreme Court came back with the settlement.
Representative, that's not correct. The case is actually at a fairly early stage as a procedural matter, even though it's been pending for a while. So the Texas Supreme Court has not weighed in yet on this case.
So this is just an offer? This is an offer on behalf of the state to quicken the case?
We entered into settlement discussions, I think it was about 3 weeks ago. It was a time with litigation uncertainty for both sides, and that is a good time in any case to explore the possibility of settlement. For that reason, the Attorney General, authorized us to explore that topic. We filed a notice with the Texas Supreme Court saying that we were going to attempt to settle and go into mediation and asking the Supreme Court to temporarily stay the case. At that time, one of the plaintiffs made a filing saying that they would not participate in mediation. Under no circumstances would they agree to settle the case. About 2 weeks later, we then notified the court that we have a settlement on behalf of all 4 plaintiffs and asking them to continue the stay of the case. So there was no ruling by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was not the instigator of any of this. Right. We began these discussions because it made good sense as a litigation matter to mitigate the risk for the state, and it ultimately resulted in a settlement that made good financial sense for the state as well.
Okay, thank you. I have more questions.
Representative Spiller, then Representative Allison.
Thank you. Just following up on that. So is there a signed mediated settlement agreement in this, or is it just, and I'm assuming because it's pending and that MSA is confidential at this point?
The MSA is actually public. And there is a signed MSA. It's enforceable under the Civil Practice and Remedies Code and Rule 11.
Okay.
So we do have a settlement. We're negotiating final settlement terms now, but it is a final enforceable settlement.
Okay. And so the MSA signed, and it's subject to the approval of the legislature and presumably the governor as well, correct?
That's right, Representative. All of our employment settlements include language that makes it contingent on necessary approvals. Typically, those approvals include approval by the Attorney General's office, the Comptroller, and often the Governor's office. In this case, again, because of the $250,000 cap in the GAA, that also includes legislative approval.
Okay. And so I think you'd already said that you've spent about $600,000 so far. The case has been going on for a while, but it's in the early. Is it in the early stages of discovery, or what? And kind of where would the case otherwise be subject to the settlement?
Yeah, procedurally, we are at an early stage. So there has been some initial motions practice. There's been one hearing that's occurred. Otherwise, it's been stayed pending several appeals. No discovery has occurred yet.
Okay.
So a discovery is, for any employment case, is always long and intensive and very costly.
And along that line, I'm assuming that if for some reason the settlement were not approved, and it sounds like you're kind of hedging where we go from there, but I'm assuming that would proceed, the case would therefore proceed to trial or subject to other disposition through summary judgment or whatever else may be available, that would happen in the future, and ultimately somebody would have their day in court and you'd have a trial absent some other prior disposition.
Because it's pending litigation, I don't want to get into too many specifics about what may or may not happen. Litigation is always filled with uncertainty and risk to all sides, so it's difficult to predict. What I will say is one of the things we're petitioning for the Supreme Court is just to dismiss the case outright under the text of the whistleblower statute. So, but I wouldn't want to answer that question specifically because the litigation is still pending.
Right. But do you have any kind of forecasting about what your potential cost would be moving forward, absent the approval of the request for the 3.3? Do you have any idea of what that range of costs would be?
Yes, absolutely. And that was one of the, if not the major factor that we were looking at in determining whether to enter into this settlement. The $3.3 million would essentially be our cost of defense, even if we were to go to trial, litigate it, and completely win on the merits. At the end of the day, that money is going to get spent regardless because of the need to have outside counsel for this case.
And
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, now, that's if we win at trial. If we lose at trial, the exposure, the damages exposure would obviously be higher than that. And again, because it is pending litigation, I don't want to get into too many specifics, but I feel comfortable saying that it would be much higher than what we've agreed to enter into here. If it would potentially be much higher if we were to litigate and lose.
And the reason I'm asking, because I've been practicing law for 36 years, and I've been doing mediation since 97. I've done over 1,000 of them, so I'm familiar with the process. And one of the questions I would ask is, what's it going to cost you to move forward? There's no, even if you win, there's no win. There's no recovery that you get. There's only downside from here out. And so if you've told me, I think, that your cost of defense to move forward would be in excess of the 3.3. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right. And that's why when we were looking at this settlement, it's ultimately in the interest of the state from a financial perspective. There is no, financially speaking, there is no upside for the state to this case. Even total vindication at trial results in a significant expenditure.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Spiller. Representative Allison?
Thank you. Just following up a little bit, it strikes me that we're kind of in the proverbial rock and a hard place in that we either pay the $3.3 million now or pay far more than that, either in additional legal expenses or an unfortunate result. Does that pretty much sum it up?
It pretty much does, and I'd say litigation is almost always it puts you in between a rock and a hard place. These are, the same types of decisions that our clients in employment cases have to make in all the cases that we handle for them. So.
And I think you said there's been $600,000 expended so far?
I think it's actually slightly under that. I would defer to, some other numbers experts on the exact amount.
Whatever the number, where did that money come from? Is that just out of the general budget? Was it specifically appropriated?
Actually, don't know the answer to that question. Yeah, it's out of the general budget. It went through our outside counsel contract approval process.
Okay. What's the issue before the Supreme Court that's been stayed?
We have filed, it's called a petition for review, on the legal issue of whether there is liability under the so-called Whistleblower Act, in this case where the person kind of at the center of the allegations is the elected official themselves. We think the fair reading of the Whistleblower Act is that it does not cover those situations. There's obviously a dispute between the parties on that, and the Supreme Court has not yet made a determination as to whether or not it will accept the petition for review and actually hear argument on the case.
Okay. And then, if I understand correctly, the Justice Department has recently said they're going to investigate the underlying actions, correct?
Representative, that would be outside my scope of expertise. I'm here as a representative of the agency, and that's what the settlement was on behalf of the Office of the Attorney General. I am aware of the news reports related to that. Obviously, the underlying facts of the case are have been heavily reported.
Okay. But you are aware that the Justice Department has indicated they're going to investigate?
I don't have any personal knowledge of that. I have seen some news articles related to that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Allison. I do have a question. Was there an active decision for the state to take this case?
I'm sorry, Chairman, I don't understand the question.
Was there an active decision for the state to take this case? Meaning the OAG's office has declined to represent other entities, other agencies. So was there an active decision to say we're going to take this case? Or because the agency could have technically denied it, because you have denied other opportunities to represent, for example, the State Commission on Judicial Conduct.
Mr. Webster is going to address this question.
So in this matter, this mirrored, if we're comparing it to other state agencies, when we decline other state agencies, we allow them to get outside counsel. Many times that occurs because there's a conflict or some issue when there's other state agencies involved. So we have never prevented someone from defending themselves. There's no precedent for that. Most of the time when a state agency comes to us and asks, in that example, asks for representation from us, a lot of times they come to us and they say, we want to get our own lawyers because there's whatever reason. And so we have not been declining and then leaving them without representation.
Does the Attorney General's office then pay for the outside counsel for those agencies if you all actively deny them?
So here's an example. Most of our denials of representation are because the agency requests that we deny. For example, UT systems, a lot of the university systems, they'll come in and ask us on the front end, say, hey, will you deny this representation because we want to get our own lawyer? And so then they would pay for that lawyer out of their own fees.
But that doesn't happen 100% of the time. Sometimes y'all have denied an agency without them requesting. Is that accurate?
So it's a very tiny percentage. Over the last year, there were 60 of these quote-unquote denials. Most of the denials occurred because they asked for it. The second most common denial is because the statute did not allow us to represent them. And in a very, very tiny subset, and again, we have to get into specifics of each case, there's been an issue of constitutionality or a violation of the statute. Because General Paxton's constitutional obligations under the Texas Constitution are to uphold the Constitution. So we can't take a position in a case that violates the Constitution.
But you're making that determination without, you are our state lawyer. So your responsibility is to take care of our state agency. But then if you're making some decision that say, well, it's unconstitutional, that's your opinion in some ways.
Look, I swore, but there's another percentage of the case. I think you've covered about three-quarters of the case. There's others where we actually they're asking us to go out and represent a position that's opposite of what we've taken in other cases. So we get that sometimes where we can't take a position opposite positions we've already taken in litigation. So I think of the 38,000 cases, it is rare that we assert the constitutional issue, but I swore to uphold the Constitution. So if we're given a case that appears to us clearly to be unconstitutional, they want us to take a position against the Constitution, that's a real problem for me, given my oath.
Well, you're also elected to be our state lawyer. And I guess what I'm asking from a fiscal perspective, and Brent, I'm looking at you because I want the answers. You said it's a very few times when you all deny. So, for example, the State Commission on Judicial Conduct, you all denied they're representing them, and then the agency had to pay for their own outside counsel. I would like a breakdown of when you denied and why you denied over the last 8 years.
I don't have that breakdown on hand or in my memory, but I'm happy to provide that to you.
Yes.
I will say regarding the State Judicial Conduct Commission, we did decline, and I was involved in some of that, some First Amendment claims that they were trying to bring against one of the current Democrat state senators. And we believe that their position in that situation violated the First Amendment. So there are examples of those situations that we've had recently.
Was that the Sarah Eckhart?
That was Senator Eckhart. And so we declined rep in two of the cases against her for First Amendment grounds. So we take those First Amendment claims very seriously.
And clearly, it's not party-driven. She's obviously in the Democratic Party, but the First Amendment overrides party affiliation.
I hear you. I just would like that information, please. All right, members, are there any other questions?
One more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
One
that's
more if I
fine.
can.
Yes, of course.
Thank you, Chair. Well, you answered the first one, and that's, I think, in summary, what you're saying is the bulk of the expenses on this case have yet to be incurred, right? I think that's what I was hearing earlier.
Yes, that's correct.
And then second, going back to the salary increases, I understood, and I think I misheard. 5% is built in for 24, another 5%, 25, and then you're asking for 7 on top of that or 12 on top of that?
It's 12. 12.
Okay, thank you.
Members, any other questions? All right. Thank you, General Paxton.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
The chair calls Charles Smith, analyst for the Legislative Budget Board. Gosh, I put a lot of people.
There were 12 people.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Charlie Smith, Legislative Budget Board, and I'll be going over the summary of Rex packet for the Comptroller of Public Accounts, following which I will jump right into the fiscal programs portion, assuming there are no questions. Recommendations for the 24-25 biennium include $694.5 million in all funds. This represents an overall increase of $29.6 million, primarily in general revenue due to salary adjustments. Also includes 2,955.3 FTEs per fiscal year, which remains level with appropriations from 22-23. Page 2. Section 2 highlights significant funding changes for the 24-25 biennium. The primary change is an increase of $30.5 million in general revenue for salary adjustments, offset by slight decreases in appropriated receipts and interagency contracts. Also reflected is a reallocation of $5.6 million across all strategies into salaries and travel in order to budget for full staffing. Page 3. Under selected fiscal and policy issues, item 1 details funding for the Centralized Accounting and Payroll and Personnel System, or CAPS. Recommendations include $96.8 million in general revenue funds for the ongoing support of CAPS. Agencies have been deploying onto the statewide version of CAPS since 2016. There are 2 deployments. That's one for financials and then one for HR and payroll. And accepting legislative agencies, there's only 3 agencies left to deploy. That is ERS, Lottery Commission, and TDCJ. And figure 2 at the bottom here shows historical deployment appropriations, just included as a reference. Moving on to page 4, I'll skip down to item 2. This highlights agency reporting on the utilization of historically underutilized businesses, or hubs. This reporting is required in government code, and the LBB compiles this data into a single report, which is included on page 12 of this packet. Recommendations maintain Article 9, Section 708, which indicates that this information is available on the LBB website. And figure 3 here gives a high-level summary of the attainment of hub goals by agencies and institutions of higher education. Page 5. Rider highlights include an increase to the agency's capital budget authority of approximately $3 million for the biennium. Additionally, we are recommending the deletion of Rider 20, Improve and Enhance Security and Services. This was added last session to identify the new funding of $5.8 million for the purposes of improving IT security and tax services to improve voluntary compliance. This funding is now built into the agency's base, so the rider is no longer necessary. And finally, Article 9, Section 909 identifies agencies scheduled for CAPS deployment in the upcoming biennia. And on the next page, you can see the updated list of those agencies. And that's the only change, just an updated list. So I'll move on to page 7. The agency has 2 exceptional items totaling $24.5 million. The first is for $6.4 million in general revenue for raises in the audit and enforcement divisions. And the second is for $18.1 million to develop a new accounting software to replace USAS as well as TENS. So that will conclude this portion of the presentation. Happy to take any questions, if there are any.
Members, any questions? Representative Jarvis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. I'm going back to page 4 when you said the hubs. I'm looking at, can you explain this just a little bit clearer? We're looking at, so we're saying over the years, anywhere from, explain these numbers to me, because I'm looking at goals not met, 45, 44, 63, 56. So we're not meeting our goals of all of these line items of heavy construction building, so we're not meeting those goals?
That is what the data would indicate on some of these, yes.
And this is just for higher ed?
No, this is for agencies as well as institutions.
Okay, all right. And do you have any other data that says why they're not meeting these? Is there?
The comptroller's website goes into more detail, and you can break it down by agency, but I'll let.
Lena Conklin with the Legislative Budget Board. On an individual basis, this information is provided in the agency's legislative appropriations requests, and there's a schedule in the LAR. Do you recall what that is? Should be in here, right? I'm going to say off the top of my head 6A. And that provides some text explanations from agency, so that might provide more detail, but it's not rolled up on any of our reports.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Good job. Thank you.
Okay. Up next, I'll be presenting the summary of recommendations for the comptroller's fiscal programs. This includes $1.77 billion in all funds, which represents a decrease of $34.3 million from the 22-23 biennium. And recommendations also include 43 FTEs per fiscal year, which is an increase of 23 from the current biennium. Page 2. Under significant funding changes, the first item is an increase of $151.8 million in general revenue for mixed beverage tax reimbursements to cities and counties. Item 2 is an increase of $34 million in general revenue to reverse a method of finance swap initiated last session with State Highway Fund 6 used to pay gross weight and axle weight permit fees out to counties. Recommendations are to return the funding source to GR to align with statute. And the last significant funding change is the addition of $350 million in general revenue for the addition of a new grant program for rural county law enforcement. Page 3. Under selected fiscal and policy issues, recommendations include funding the agency's exceptional item to pay mixed beverage tax disbursements. As I mentioned, this is $151.8 million increase for a total of $635.1 million in general revenue. Item 2 is the agency's exceptional item request to increase their FTE cap from 20 to 43. The additional FTEs will be allocated to the Broadband Development Office and the Energy Conservation Office for the administration of federal funding made available for these purposes. And skipping down to item 5 relating to the Texas Guaranteed Tuition Plan, recommendations include the intention to fund the full payoff amount of $243.8 million in the supplemental bill. This is a decrease of $27.4 million from the biennial payment made during this current biennium alone. Page 4. Rider highlights include modifications to the following. For 9, 10, and 15, we've just updated the amounts to reflect accurate funding levels. For Rider 22, the opioid abatement account, this is just to revise the wording a bit to align with statute. The rider was written as a contingency rider for Senate Bill 1827. That legislation has passed, and the wording needs to be updated accordingly. And there is one new rider identifying funding for the grant program that will provide rural counties with law enforcement resources contingent on the enactment of legislation authorizing the new program. Under deleted riders, we are recommending the deletion of their capital budget rider. Fiscal programs only had one item in their capital budget from last session. That's $20 million in revenue bonds to purchase the depository building, which is currently being leased. Ultimately, the landowner opted not to sell, and the agency lapsed the $20 million. And finally, the deletion of Rider 23, appropriation for gross weight and axle weight permit fees distribution to counties. If we return that funding source to general revenue, then the rider which specifies State Highway Fund 6 as the funding source would no longer be valid. Fiscal programs has no additional exceptional items, so that will conclude my presentations.
Members, any questions for the LBB? Thank you. The chair calls the Honorable Glenn Hager, Comptroller of Public Accounts. Thank you, Comptroller, for your patience.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. Glenn Hager, Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts. Glad to be here today to discuss our budget request. As you know, our agency is charged with keeping the state's financial books in order, collecting and processing, auditing the state's taxes, writing the state's checks, depositing and accounting for the state's money, estimating the state's revenue, and managing the state's purchasing functions. In order to accomplish those duties, we appreciate the funding provided in your House budget. This will allow the agency to perform our constitutional and statutory duties and to continue my attempt to upgrade our IT systems, including the continuation of the modernization of the agency's tax systems and web applications to expand electronic filing, provide taxpayers with additional self-service features, and improve the quality of taxpayers' experience. I would also like to note that we have provided the LBB, as I said, with 2 additional exceptional items that we are asking this session. Those items include 1, additional funds to restructure the salaries for the agency's audit and enforcement divisions, totaling $6.4 million for the biennium. This effort will reduce both division staff turnover and increase the agency's overall audit and collection and compliance efforts. And as you know, that brings in the state's revenues. We are also requesting funding for our legacy fiscal modernization project, totaling $18.1 million for the biennium. As state agencies have successfully been operating on the state's Enterprise Resource Planning System, also known as CAPS, for over 10 years and continuing to be onboarded onto the system, older mainframe legacy financial systems, such as the Uniform Statewide Accounting System, USAS, and the Texas Identification Number System, known as TINS, needs to be updated and modernized. These mainframe legacy systems are reliant on aging technology, and modernizing these critical systems will reduce our reliance on expensive and outdated technology, decrease system inefficiencies, and improve user experience so the business of the state of Texas will remain uninterrupted. In addition to the exceptional items, I'd also like to mention the need to maintain continuing efforts of our state-owned office buildings outside of Austin. Many buildings around the state, including those in Waco, Dallas, San Antonio, are in need of deferred maintenance. While the Texas Facilities Commission will undoubtedly talk in much more details about these facilities, as an agency that uses these buildings, I feel like I must note that they are showing their age and should be slated for upgrades, repairs, in order to maintain for future generations, or in some situations, completely demolished as they are beyond return for investment for the legislature. Last session, the legislature created the Texas Broadband Development Office, placed it within my agency. This is a new program is charged with expanding access to broadband service in underserved areas. We appreciate the additional 23 FTEs for fiscal programs, which includes 18 FTEs for the Broadband Development Office and 5 FTEs for the State Energy Conservation Office. With that, that concludes my prepared testimony, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Comptroller. Members, any questions?
Glad to see you this morning.
Why do you have?
And I was able to finish my coffee while I was waiting, so thank you.
So glad to make you. No, but I do have a
feel
question.
refreshed for the rest of my day.
Feel ready? Okay. But can you just give a quick update on where we are in the opioid abatement?
Yeah, happy to do that. So the Attorney General's office, as well as several cities and counties, are suing on behalf of the state of Texas. Very complex litigation. We have received some funds to the state of Texas that have come in. There are different buckets, as you may recall. There are 15% of the money, which is up to you as the legislature to distribute across the state as you so fit. There is 15% of the dollars that will go to local entities across the state of Texas, counties and cities, those that were litigating on their own behalf with their own counsel, as well as those that are called non-litigating, which in reality they are litigating because they're represented by the Attorney General's office. And then lastly, 70%, which goes to the Opioid Abatement Council, which is housed at the Comptroller's office. I am the chair. That essentially we are the staff for the council. We have had probably 3-4 meetings right now. The last meeting was probably the best meeting because we are now putting forth our rules to set up our structure upon which the council rely on to try to set forth those dollars across the state, across the 20 health regions across the state. It's pretty complex because, one, we don't know what all is out there for services. There's different strategies that are going to be set up. Some of those are obviously legislative, set in state statute. They were also part of the agreement between everybody in these litigations, and so those dollars are coming in. My office has been attempting to distribute out to the locals their share that has been received up to date. That has been a very difficult task. All of you have gotten letters up to about 2 weeks ago asking you to help us encourage your local entities mostly those that are non-litigating, mostly those that the Attorney General's office is representing, because we don't have their wiring instructions. And so therefore, we're trying to make sure we can get them their money. It has been asserted that it's easy, it's simple. Well, the problem is if I ever send you the money and it's not the right wire instructions, I may not get it back. So we have to make sure it's done right. Now, obviously, there are some local entities that I think in the first tranche of funding would be about, I think, 8 cents. So I can understand why they probably are not worried about getting in their wiring instructions, and these funds will be distributed over 18 years. So, what I was hoping to do is get to about 75% of the local entities, and we would disperse those dollars. But in fact, we're only at about 60%. And so pretty much all the ones that are represented by local council as well as a bulk of the others have sent in, but we still have 40% that have not. And so what I told my staff is let's go ahead on March 1. We're going to distribute those funds. And then as we continue, and hopefully your help and others can help us, we've reached out to county associations, municipal associations, everybody that we can. We've asked the Attorney General's office to help us. So we're trying to make sure that we can get them their funds. And so hopefully we will be able, at least from the abatement portion, which is 70% of the money, be able to start distributing those dollars come next year. Some have argued, oh my goodness, you should have done it as soon as you got the money. Well, the reality is you want to make sure you have it structured properly, that everybody has fairness in the system. There are 20 health regions. You want to make sure that every health region, which is what your intent was, would get a portion of those dollars. And then if they don't utilize those dollars within the strategies, it can be redistributed per the council across the state. Opioid abuse has been very terrible in this nation. It has changed drastically to some degree in the fact that it used to be prescription medicine, both that people would get in the black market, and now unfortunately it has turned to much more deadly fentanyl use. And so we're working very hard to get those funds out, but I wanted to set up a structure that no one could say in any shape, form, or fashion that the council did not make the best decisions, or there would be any arguments that they in some shape, form, or fashion were funding their cohorts in their universities or wherever it be. You want to set up a process that is pretty much you can't attack, and because it is their reputations and they're doing this for free.
No, and I appreciate it, and thank you for your leadership on that. I know my office got one of the letters to help with one of our.
Thank you for that.
So we really can see your.
Appreciate y'all helping, very much so.
Representative Jarvis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Comptroller Hager, you had mentioned the broadband.
Yes, sir.
Can you give me a little bit more detail on how that rollout is going?
Yes,
and
sir.
You said underserved communities, and so I like to be able to make to differentiate rural versus
Yes, sir.
Urban, and how that rollout is going.
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative. So there are mostly 2 buckets of funding. The first bucket of funding is what's kind of deemed the ARPA funding, the first kind of package of funding that y'all gave us, you authorized in the last special sessions, and those funds are about $500 million. Now, a portion of those, we were supposed to have in a program, which was called the Pole Attachment Program. Mostly cable was looking for that. It was $75 million. We've asked the funds, the federal government, U.S. Treasury, which is over that $500 million, to essentially approve that. They've given us indications they're not. However, if they don't, you're going to come back and probably tell us how we should allocate those funds. That first $500 million, we have the window set up so we can start getting applications out the door. So hopefully that first tranche of funding, we have been approved. I think it's over $300 and I think it's $20 million or so. Staff can correct me if I'm off a little bit. But $300+ million is the first authorized.
Application.
Of the $500 million that can go across the state of Texas. Now, one complicating factor is the federal government has mapped the entire nation. We were required to map the state of Texas. Now, that mapping is really for the second bunch of funding, but I'll come back to the first in just a second. That second batch of funding is in the bipartisan federal infrastructure bill. There's $42 billion of that infrastructure bill that is allocated for broadband across the states and the U.S. territories. The federal map is going to determine what share each state gets in U.S. territory. We think that funding could be between $2 to $4 billion for the state of Texas, still a wide range. We're going to be able to know that probably come this summer. is what we're going to be told. Now, back to the maps, one of the issues, the federal map and our map has to follow state law. One of the issues is in-state statute, for example, and there is legislation. Representative Ashby, Senator Nichols is working to kind of have what I would say a cleanup bill, but I think as Representative Ashby said the other day, it's almost broadband office part 2, because one of the issues is the federal government has us looking at 25.3 upload download speeds. But as I did a tour this time last year across the state, a listening tour in all the sectors of the state of Texas, the 12 economic regions, for telemedicine, for example, that upload speed on both ends, it needs to be 100 and 100. And so while we're required to look at whether you and your constituents have service at 25.3, I wanted our maps, and we're having the next round of versions of maps, to also show what do we really need to have for the state. I mean, what we have to have. And this does get talked about as a rural need, which it is, but a big significant portion, there are folks in suburban, urban areas that don't have that service. Even if they could afford the service, the fact is there are areas that have service and it's not very good. Now, what we have to look at is whether you have service or not. There are 7 million people across the state, 3 million households, that have no service even if they want it. One of the frustrating things for me is in the maps, it looks like the bulk of the state is serviced because some of the providers in providing their information, and they don't have to provide the information to us of where they provide service. But if you look at the 25.3, you look at latency issues, the timing of up and download speeds. So the issue is, if you look across the state in the maps, it looks like that a lot of people have service, when in reality, they don't. And so I think that's an important issue we have to clarify, because some are over-exaggerating, and I know that's a shock to you, Representative, an over-exaggeration of where they have good service and where they don't. Yeah. So the first tranche of funding will be going out, hopefully, in the next several months for a little over $100 million of the $500 million, $300 million of which we've been approved. The $2 to $4 billion will have better identification on that this summer of what the state's going to do.
Is that what you were talking about when you said application, so that people, the companies can apply to?
And we work with the private vendors. There's an entire process that, say, for example, if you want to be able to acquire dollars through this process, and say Representative Spiller does, and those territories overlap, there's a challenge process by which we can identify which one of you really is servicing this area. So it's going to take a little time through some of these challenge process. We're trying to encourage 2 vendors to work this out, but in essence, only one can serve an area.
I do want to be able to say this.
Yes, sir.
In respect to some of these areas where they say we have service.
Yes, sir.
But it's really not that good.
That's right. I call it shitty, but I wouldn't want to say that in public testimony.
Well.
So hopefully, did I say that? My bad.
You didn't say it.
It's real shitty, to be honest.
You didn't say it. And so I don't want the same companies giving more shitty service.
You and I have something we can work on together on this.
Let's make sure that we don't reward bad behavior.
That's right.
Or those that exaggerate their ability.
That's right.
Because even in these urban, suburban areas, I'm seeing very horrible service. I mean, it's just garbage.
That is correct.
You know, I just want to put that on the record to say, look, you can't continue to reward these guys when they say, oh, we're going to do a great job, and you're not doing a great job now.
You and I are on the exact same page, which is the different buckets of one is their service that's available. And then let's be honest, is it really good service or not good service? Let's call it for what it is. And then the fact is affordability is another major piece that doesn't have to do with the funding we have, but I keep talking about it because that's another piece. And I'll give the example of several years ago. We've all lived through this in COVID. You know, my kids come home, they had the ability to do schoolwork. There's a whole lot of kids right down the street that did not. And you know, that digital equity across is about making sure everyone has ability to have service. And if you want to truly have economic opportunities in your district, and everybody's district, regardless of where that's across the state, people have to have internet access in this century.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Members, any other questions? Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I can't ever see your light, so just.
Well, thank you, Chair. First of all, congratulations for getting in the broadband business.
Yes, thank you, I think. Ask me again in a few sessions.
The priority of this is
It's important.
It's very important, and I'm glad that we're tackling it. The two buckets of funding, the ARPA funding, the $500 million, $320 has been authorized, and then this federal funds, the $42 billion, which Texas should get somewhere between $2 and $4 billion of that.
Hopefully, yes, sir.
All of these funds deal with the infrastructure piece of it, the build out and
That is correct. That is correct.
And it's not really intended to be subsidize the consumer for their monthly payments or things like that.
That is correct.
But the effect of which would be, I believe, somewhat of a subsidy to the consumer ultimately, right?
By having the ability to have access to it, yes. Okay. And hopefully, the biggest cost, one, we try to be technology neutral. That's what the office, now obviously long-lasting for emergency management, other pieces are fiber, but we need to have bridges to be able to connect people in the intermediary. But, the biggest cost is that infrastructure build out. That's the biggest cost. And that's why in some areas, your district, some other areas, it's not there because of the cost.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Members, any other questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, appreciate it. Call me if y'all need something.
Of course. We'll continue on with the agenda. The chair calls KJ Curtis, analyst with the LBB.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm KJ Curtis with the Legislative Budget Board, presenting the summary of budget recommendations for the Texas Commission on the Arts. So starting on page 1, you'll see recommendations for the 24-25 biennium include an all funds total of about $23.4 million, reflecting a decrease of about $2.2 million from the 22-23 biennium. Moving on to page 2. Here in section 2, you'll see item A identifies that decrease of $2.2 million in general revenue for one-time funding for the Cultural and Performing Arts Center grant. Item A also includes a slight increase in general revenue due to the exhaustion of the remaining balances in the general revenue dedicated arts operating account. And then also pull your attention down to item E, showing the total increase in general revenue for the exempt and non-exempt salary adjustment. Moving to page 3. Just as a note, there is no section 3. There were no selected fiscal and policy issues to discuss this for the 24-25 biennium. So here on page 3, you'll see that Rider 5, unexpended balances, Cultural and Performing Arts Center grant, has been revised to continue authority for the agency to carry forward balances. Moving on to page 4. Here you'll see the exceptional items requested by the agency totaling $8.1 million. Items 1 and 2 include increases to the grants program, and item 3 shows an update to the request to increase staff salaries. And this concludes my prepared remarks.
Members, any questions? I have a couple questions, but I'll ask the agency first, and if they can't answer, I might call you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The chair calls Gary Gibbs, Executive Director of the Texas Commission of the Arts.
Chairman, Vice Chair, members, I'm Gary Gibbs, the Executive Director of Texas Commission on the Arts. I'm happy to share our LAR request with you this morning. I'll be referring to this document that we sent you. In this year, when we started with our LAR, we decided to look at the data and base our request on the data that we found at our agency. And so the first exceptional item that we're requesting is a grant for arts organization grants. And if you'll look on page 2 of that document, you'll see the chart that shows that this budget in this particular grant category has been stagnant since 2014. And yet we've had a 30% increase in the demand on those grants. And so this additional $3 million that we're asking for, these are the types of grants that we award in your districts to arts organizations for operating support, but also for project support that reflect the priorities of state government, including economic development, health and human services, criminal justice and public safety, natural resources and agriculture and education. Also sends artists into your districts to perform in schools and libraries and those types of things. And each of you that are on this particular committee have those grants in your districts. So with this increase of $3 million, we feel like that's a very conservative ask. And since there has been no increase in this budget item in many, many years, this would basically get us back to the 2014 level of the impact of these grants. Because with inflation and no increase in the budget, the impact that these grants are having on these organizations is less. And so that is our hope, to bring it back at least to the 2014 level. The second exceptional item has to do with cultural districts. Cultural districts is a program that the legislature mandated our agency to designate, and we have 52 different cultural districts all across the state. Cultural districts use the arts to spur economic development, to attract cultural tourists, who are the highest spending tourists that there are, and also to create community vitality. And I can tell you that this program has been a huge success. You can see from the chart on page 4, and the reason that we're asking for an additional $5 million for this program is because since 2016, when we were first funded for this program, the number of eligible applicants has doubled in this category. So again, in order to provide the funding for these organizations that's being requested of our agency, we need the increase in the grants amounts. The other thing I want to share with you is that this program, as I mentioned, is a huge success. Currently, if you visit cultural districts around the state, you'll see other development occurring around those districts. I'll give you 2 examples. In Fort Worth, around the arts district, there's all kinds of hotels, mixed development use buildings being created right on the edges of the cultural district because people want to have access to things to do. Our newest cultural district is in Conroe, and I just received 2 weeks ago a notice from the folks there that 3 new high-rise developments, mixed-use developments, will be built directly in the cultural district itself. So it's having the impact that you wanted it to have. Our third exceptional item, first let me say thank you to you for House Bill 1 and the salary increases that are provided there. We're asking for additional increases in this particular area. It's a modest amount. But my agency, I've been at the agency for many years now, and we are just now seeing turnover like we've never seen before. And you'll see on page 6 some data related to how employees feel about their salaries. And so we're asking for these additional dollars to especially help those entry-level positions that we have in our agency that have been turning over, because we find ourselves now not just competing with other state agencies, but actually competing with the nonprofit arts organizations in the state, that you can go make more money working for the symphony than you can for our agency. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gibbs. Members, are there any questions? I have a couple of questions. So you stated on page 1 of your presentation that you are faced with 30% increase in organizational support, but you also noted that each grant awarded by TCA must be matched by private funds. Who are these matchers? Are they foundations? Are they businesses and local communities? And how does that work?
Yeah, it can be earned income through ticket sales to performances or museum entrances. It could be philanthropic gifts through corporations or individuals or foundations.
And so completely understand why you would like to see an increase to your budget. And you said it hasn't been increased since 2014, right?
Correct.
So like nearly a decade.
Yes.
And in the 10 years that you have been doing this work, how much has the state, I see that you're talking about organizational growth, but also we're serving a lot more people in the state of Texas. Is there also a population growth that you can do like a comparison to? So the state has grown by this many people, and thus our organizations are asked to serve a lot more people, and thus they're just having to spread their dollars even more?
Right. When I came to the agency 15 years ago, I think the population of Texas was around 19 million. And I think the latest estimates are we're around 30 million. So that kind of speaks for itself.
So we have some catching up to do possibly?
We do.
Okay.
We rank 48th in per capita funding for the arts.
And what is the harm of us ranking so low when it comes to funding for the arts?
Corporations in particular, if you're trying to attract business to a state, they look for cultural amenities. They look for the arts. Their employees, especially in today's workforce, employees are demanding things to do and see. They want to live in communities that offer these rich cultural resources. And so it's important to the economic vitality of the state.
I really appreciate that there is a definite return on investment to our Texas economy by investing in the arts. So thank you for your work. Members, are there any other questions?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll continue on with the agenda. The chair calls Harrison Gregg, analyst for the Legislative Budget Board.
My name is Harrison Gregg. I am with the Legislative Budget Board, and I will be presenting the summary of budget recommendations for the Bond Review Board. Starting on page 1 of your packet, recommendations for the House introduced bill include $2 million in general revenue funds, which is a $0.2 million increase from the current biennium. Please turn to page 2. Here, we have one funding change, which is related to salary adjustments and the addition of funding for an increase in salary for the agency's executive director, or its exempt position. Please turn to page 3. Here we have fiscal and policy issues. Item 1 discusses the constitutional debt limit. At the end of fiscal year 22, the Bond Review Board reported that the issued debt was 1.11% and that the combined issued and authorized but unissued debt was 2.25%. Please turn to page 4. Item 2 provides an overview of the outstanding debt for the state of Texas. As of the end of fiscal year 22, the state's outstanding debt sits at about $64.4 billion. Item 3, which is at the bottom of the page, concerns the state's bond rating, which is AAA or the equivalent at all 3 major credit rating agencies. Please turn over to page 5. Item 4 discusses the revenue related to the private activity bond program. Since fiscal year 2014, revenue collected from the program has steadily increased, with $2 million in revenue being collected in fiscal year 22. Please turn to page 6. Here we have rider highlights, which includes the addition of a rider that would enable for the agency to carry forward unexpended balances within the biennium from fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 25. Please turn to page 7. And then section 5 includes agency exceptional items that are not included in recommendations. These requests total about $705,000 in all funds. And the 2 items included here include additional funding for critical classified staff positions or staff salaries. And then the second item is for a capital IT project related to website upgrades. That will conclude my remarks. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Members, any questions? Thank you so much. The chair calls Rob Lachsa. I'm saying that wrong. I'm so sorry. Executive Director of the Bond Review Board. Rob, I know how to say your name, and I practice, and I just haven't had enough coffee this morning.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. There are some of us with W's in the end, some of us without W's. So My name is Rob Latshaw. I'm the Executive Director of the Bond Review Board. We have three main charges at our agency. One is to review and approve state debt transactions before they go to market. We also act as curators for local government debt. So for every debt issuance that happens at the local level, that information comes to our office, and we have staff that reorients that debt service to the state's fiscal year so we can compare apples to apples among all the local issuers. So if you see debt data that comes from either Controller's Office, the LBB, or the Texas Tribune, we were likely the wellspring from which that debt information came from. Our third charge is administering the private activity bond program. It's in excess of $3 billion in volume cap. Back in 1986, when they rewrote the tax code, they said, okay, for municipal securities, those could be invested with tax-exempt rates. And if you look at private sector debt, that would be taxable. They had kind of this gray area, and with that, they said, well, okay, we're going to punt to the states and allow the states to determine how to allocate that volume cap and allow these private use that could be used for the public good, and we allocate that we administer that every year. As Harrison mentioned, for the last 2 fiscal years, we were appropriated less than $900,000, but through the private activity bond program in 21 and 22, the state received just under $2 million in general revenues and just over $2 million in 22. As of this fiscal year, around February 6th, we have brought in $1.2 million in general revenues. Our first exceptional item that we were bringing back is competitive funding for critical classified positions. We have kind of a interesting demographic change that we've seen over the past 2 years. Per the SAO, the percentage of employees at the Bond Review Board who are under the age of 30 grew from 18.4% to now we're 3 times the state average at over 46.3%. And with our new hire who will be coming in on March, we're actually going to be higher than that with staff members who are under the age of 30. We've become a very young agency. Historically, we don't mind bringing in young, new folks who have finance degrees and so forth, but generally we become a launching platform. People go to issuers, they go to TPFA, TxDOT, Water Development Board. Our alumni have gone on to do great things. We have an alumni who's running the UT system debt portfolio. We have alumni at the Controller's Office running debt information, and the AISD treasurer was a former Bond Review Board employee. What we would like to do is get to a position where we can have a little bit of growth within the agency and allow for upward mobility in our agency, and folks don't have to jump ship and go to another place for a pay raise. Our fourth item, and we dropped 2 and 3 because we definitely appreciate what you guys have done for us in House Bill 1. The fourth item is ideally for us to save workflow in the future. In this process of where we take all the information, all the debt statistics from each local debt transaction, the idea would be to create a web form and allow bond councils to actually input some of that data into the website and potentially reducing the amount of work that we have our techs and some of our analysts doing. So with that, I believe I'll complete my testimony.
Thank you so much. Members, any questions? I just have a couple questions. Sure. So first off, if I retire from the legislature, I'm going to go work at your agency because then I can get a job anywhere, apparently. So, and I'm glad that you all are hiring folks, but the turnover is concerning. When people leave, and you do exit interviews, is pay the predominant reason?
And also, we not just exit interviews, we poll our staff, I think at least every semi-annually, and the lowest number, as far as satisfaction happens to be pay. And it's not just our low-level folks. We lost our CFO this past year. He was 6 figures, but went to work for the the Austin Firefighter Pension Fund with over 70% increase in salary. We lost our old private activity bond administrator, And this is a realm that goes to the private sector. But at the time, I told folks, well, I think it was around 400% that he left for an increase in salary. Is actually closer to 600%. But he had to go pass some tests and, and be able to give advice and investments. But there is a wide, big world for folks who have, who learn to run debt service. And because we use the same tools, if you're First Southwest, you're an underwriting firm, we use DBC, which is one of the tools that that folks across the board use to analyze debt issuances. So if you do like numbers, I'll hire you.
I like horses more than numbers, but no, but I appreciate that. And so until this last 5% cut that we put in increase we put in HB1, when's the last time your agency saw an increase in staff pay?
It would have to have been the last, I would say the last group. I can bring my CFO.
Oh,
We can get that information to you.
2014.
2014,
so about
that's right.
10 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for all of your work, members. Are there any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So we'll continue with the agenda. The chair calls KJ Curtis, analyst of the Legislative Budget Board.
Hello again. KJ Curtis with the Legislative Budget Board, presenting the summary of budget recommendations for the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas, also known as CPRIT. So starting on page 1, you'll see recommendations for the 24-25 biennium include an all funds total of $600 million, primarily made up of general obligation bond proceeds, reflecting an increase of about $5.7 million compared to the 22-23 biennium. Moving on to page 2. Here at the top, item A identifies a technical adjustment of $6.2 million in GO bonds, which we'll discuss more on the next page. And then further down the page are various decreases, all due to balances carried forward from the 22-23 biennium. Turning to page 3, item 1 shows the Rider 4 transfer to the Department of State Health Services, or DSHS, for the Cancer Registry. CPRIT is required to transfer general obligation bond proceeds to DSHS per Rider 4 of CPRIT's bill pattern and Rider 23 of DSHS. CPRIT's base request reflected this transfer, thus lowering the agency's overall request by $6.2 million for the 24-25 biennium. And so recommendations include this technical adjustment to modify the GO bond proceeds. Item 2 provides an overview of CPRIT's bond proceeds. The agency has updated the projected issuance with the final issuance expected in the fourth quarter of 2034. Turning to page 4. Item 3 provides an update to CPRIT's return on investment. CPRIT is required to establish standards that allow the state to collect royalties and other benefits generated from grant-funded projects. And so as there are no, And so as of October 2022, CPRIT has received $7.6 million in revenue sharing. And as there are no rider highlights and no exceptional items to discuss for the agency for the 24-25 biennium, this is the end of my prepared remarks.
Members, any questions for the LBB? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
The chair calls Wayne Roberts, Chief Executive Officer with the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas.
Good morning, members. My name is Wayne Roberts. I'm very happy to see a couple of you again. Some of you I haven't met before, and I look forward to working with you all in the months ahead and hopefully the years ahead. Despite the obstacles confronting all state agencies over the past several years, specifically the COVID pandemic, CPRIT has maintained momentum in addressing its mission since these hearings 2 years ago. CPRIT is a $6 billion, 20-year initiative, the second largest public funder of cancer research and prevention in the world. Together with Texas's well-earned business reputation, CPRIT's investments in the state's life science infrastructure solidify Texas as a global biotech hub. Due to the current slowdown in available early-stage capital, We have a pivotal opportunity in Texas to diversify our economy by being the premier location for biotech with its high-paying pharmaceutical, medical manufacturing, and healthcare sector jobs. CPRIT gives Texas a strategic advantage when competing with other states to attract biotech talent and industry. Our legislative appropriations ask is simple. We request the amounts and provisions included for CPRIT in House Bill 1. Thank you for this initial proposal, especially for the proposed 5% per year cost of living adjustment for classified state employees. Our only requested adjustment is to include the same COLA for exempt salary positions as well. This is important to avoid and reduce salary compression that occurs at CPRIT and elsewhere. Compression steadily increases at our agency as we recruit the unique personnel necessary to responsibly manage our complex scientific, prevention, and company investment programs. An exempt salary COLA is especially important for our signature employee, the Chief Scientific Officer. While her salary is high compared to those of general state employees, she is $325,000 below comparable positions at institutions of higher education from which we must recruit this position. I will stop here. Heidi McConnell, our Chief Operating Officer, is here, and hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions I'm unable to.
First off, thank you for all the work that you all do. Members, are there any questions? You're doing a great job.
Oh, come on.
Oh.
Come on, give me something.
There are other people who would be glad not to have questions.
I will you pass these out, and I will try and get together with y'all and give y'all some briefings. But thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Great job. The chair calls George Purcell, analyst of the at the Legislative Budget Board. Hi, George.
Good morning.
Yes, go ahead.
My name is George Purcell. I'll be presenting the summary of recommendations for the Commission on State Emergency Communications. The first page of the packet presents a high-level overview of the agency. Overall recommendations would reduce the appropriation for the Commission by approximately $161.9 million in all funds and $29.2 million in general revenue dedicated funds. Note that general revenue of $21.3 million has been added as a new method of finance. Turning to page 2, I would like to highlight 4 particular funding changes that have occurred since the last biennium. Item A details the removal of the main federal grant for the upcoming biennium, $150 million from the Coronavirus State Recovery Fund for the expansion of 911 services across the state. Item B shows the reduction of appropriations from Fund 5050, 911 service fees, offset by that provision of general revenue I noted earlier. Item C describes a change in the base funding for the agency that directs more funds towards grants to poison control centers. Item D is a reduction of funding due to the completion of the 911 Next Generation transition in the state program. Turning to page 3. Item 1 on selected fiscal and policy issues is a discussion of the projected fund balance for Fund 5050, 911 service fees. The majority of funds for the statewide 911 program are generated through the statutory emergency services fee on wireless and wired services that is deposited to Fund 5050. These revenue sources have seen a decline over several biennia due to the exiting of former RPCs, regional planning commissions, from the CSEC program. Wired revenues are also down due to a reduction in the number of those connections. To address this decline, Rider 9 in the 2022-23 General Appropriation Act required the Commission to develop a plan for continued funding of statewide 911 services. The Rider 9 report, which met that demand, identified the funding need for the agency in the 2024 biennium as $21.3 million. These recommendations provide this amount as general revenue. Item 2 provides information on the departure of the Lower Rio Grande Development Council Regional Planning Commission from the program. Because RPCs take revenue with them when they leave, this departure reduced revenue to Fund 50/50 by an estimated $5.2 million per year. Turning to page 4, item 3 presents some information on the distribution of the $150 million in federal coronavirus funds. Here I would point out the majority of these funds are not going to emergency service districts that are going to emergency service districts that are not part of the statewide 911 program. Turning to page 5, I will just note we are deleting 2 riders. Unexpended balances for the ESI Net project, which has been completed, and the 911 service fee reporting requirement, which was delivered. Turning to page 6, the agency is requesting both authority and funding for an increase in the executive director salary above the 2.3% provided in the base bill. Appendices are provided for your reference. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, George. Members, any questions? All right. The chair calls Kelly Merriweather, Executive Director for the Commission on State Emergency Communications.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. Thank you for having me this morning. I'm really pleased to be able to present to you on behalf of our Board of Directors on House Bill 1 and our agency. We've provided some materials in advance for your information. Our board is comprised of appointees from the Governor, Lieutenant Governor, and Speaker of the House. We are a 26 FTE, small but mighty agency with a small staff, does a great deal for the state of Texas. We accomplish our mission to preserve and enhance public safety and health in Texas through reliable access to emergency communication service. And in doing so, we do that through our 2 programs, the CSAC 911 program and the statewide poison control program. Our 911 program, that's usually referred to as the CSAC statewide 911 program, I'll get to that later, serves over 4 million Texans, provides services supporting 2.8 million calls a year, and serves 75% of the counties and 15% of the population. So you can see by that statistic that we are primarily a rural, non-urban, regional program. The funding you provides for 911 database, network operations, GIS and mapping, and critical infrastructure equipment replacement. Our statewide poison control program serves 100% of the state. It receives 470,000 calls per year through 6 regional poison control centers located at host hospitals and institutions across the state, primarily in teaching hospitals. This service provides free, confidential expert advice to the public, health professions, and emergency rooms and first responders. And we do so through reimbursement grant contracts with those hospitals. It's important to know that 911 service in Texas is statutorily defined as a communication service that connects the user to a public safety answering point by calling the digits 911. It does not include the cost of answering that call and sending response to that 911 call at the local level. That expense is local. In Texas, 911 service is provided either by a regional planning commission in our program or independent emergency communication districts. There are, we call all of these together 911 entities. There are 77 911 entities in Texas. 57 are the independent districts that are outside CSAC's oversight and funding. The 20 are RPCs inside of our program, and your appropriations are used for those expenses I noted earlier through contracts with regional planning commissions. We provided you a map in your packet of information that shows where these 911 entities are located. Our Texas Poison Control Program Network, the mission there is to provide round-the-clock telephone access to poison control specialists to reduce the morbidity, mortality, and costs associated with poisoning, and to educate Texas residents and children on how to prevent poisonings. Appropriated funds are utilized by CSEC to fund reimbursement grant contracts with the host hospitals. 87% of calls from the public are treated at home, avoiding costly ER visits, and 32% of all poison calls are from physicians, nurses, EMS providers, pharmacists, and physician's assistants. On page 7, we've also provided you a map of those regions. House Bill 1, as introduced, meets all of our needs, and our board and myself and our agency would greatly like to thank you for that, for addressing the concerns that George laid out about the funding, the fees, the fund balance. It's a complex situation. House Bill 1, as introduced, addresses our program's needs. As George noted, it does include GR and the MOF for the first time in our 30-plus year history. It meets all of our strategies and our agency's strategic plan. It does reflect the reclassification of the ED position as recommended by the SAO. It includes the much-needed salary adjustments for our dedicated staff. And it does remove the strategy for Next Generation 911, which reflects a huge accomplishment for our program over the past almost 10 years of transitioning to a new IP-based digital technology for 911 to serve the citizens of Texas for years to come. The exception request is noted, requested by our board. You have a request reflected in the letter in the packet. And with that, I would be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Members, any questions? I have a couple of questions. So you noted that for the first time, we're having to use GR as a method of finance. Are you concerned for the future of the funding mechanisms for the agency, considering that there is a decline in the dedicated fund?
Yes, ma'am. That's been a concern for the past 4 to 5 years, I would say. We've seen it coming. It was predicted. And I would say that's not unexpected. I would say that the use of that fund was a good thing because you have invested it in us to implement Next Generation 911. But now that it's invested, we do need to turn our attention to the future. And at the current fee level of 50 cents specifically on the wireless fee, that is of concern because that 50-cent fee rate just won't provide sufficient revenue to support the needs to fund the appropriation.
Good to know. And so since we haven't really changed the fees and we see this decline, does this affect all 911 entities or just those within the CSEC program?
The wireless fee affects all 911 entities. The wireless fee is set in statute at 50 cents for all wireless, for wireless fees for all 911 entities. So it greatly impacts all the entities because, most of those are outside of our program area, and they are the more metropolitan areas. And it is set in statute. It was set in 1997 in statute and hasn't changed since then. The wireline fee, the landline fee for our program was capped at 50 cents. The board does have the purview and the ability to adjust that fee, but it's already set at the cap of 50 cents. And that 50-cent cap was implemented in 1985.
Oh, wow.
So it's rather dated.
Right.
And technology and costs, of course, have changed and increased over time. So I do believe that factor needs to be accommodated and addressed in some way. General revenue is one way to do it. Allowing, as a Rider 9 recommendation, was to give some consideration to the commission to adjust the fees over time and slightly to meet the appropriation needs. And so, there's different options to do that.
Wonderful. Representative Ayala?
Just real quick. Thank you, Chair. Being new on this committee, I think historically we're seeing fewer landlines and more cell phones. So we're seeing that transition. Am I hearing that the 50-cent rate is a rate for landlines that the state of Texas set? Is that a state of Texas set rate?
Yes, sir. The wireless fee rate is set in statute by the legislature. Yes.
Is the wired fee set in statute by the legislature?
The cap is set in statute at 50 cents for our program.
What rate would, and I'm assuming people aren't avoiding calling 911 because of the 50-cent rate.
Right.
But what rate would allow for appropriate funding?
In our Rider 9 report, we ran several scenarios and highlighted 3 in the report. At 75 cents, we would generate sufficient revenue in the short term, but we would still have to pull down amounts from that dedicated fund balance, depleting it in 2026. At 85 cents, it would generate sufficient revenue out to 2027. Okay. It's a sensitive mic. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that information and for the report. Any other questions? Thank you, Kelly. Have a great day.
Thank you.
We'll continue on. The chair calls John Posey, analyst with the Legislative Budget Board.
My name is John Posey, and I'm with the Legislative Budget Board, and I will be presenting recommendations on the Texas Emergency Services Retirement System, otherwise known as TESRS. This agency provides retirement, survivor, and disability benefits for volunteer firefighters, and EMS personnel in participating departments. Recommendations total $4.1 million, which is an increase of 4.6% from the 2022-23. You'll notice up here in the second row that the agency is appropriated a lot of GR dedicated funds, and this is Fund 5064, the Volunteer Fire Department Assistance Fund. And if you'll turn with me to page 2, item A shows an increase of $60,000 to that GR dedicated account, and I'm going to discuss that a little bit more on the next page. Item B shows increases in both exempt and non-exempt salaries for the agency. The salary of the agency's executive director is increased from about $119,000 in 2023 to $125,000 in fiscal year 24 and just under $132,000 in fiscal year 2025. Recommendations appropriate just under $64,000 over the biennium for non-exempt staff as part of the statewide salary adjustment. If you'll turn with me to page 3. So that first item there is the increase in state contribution to the pension system by $60,000 for the biennium. The government code states that the maximum the state can contribute to this pension fund is 1/3 of the total of all contributions by governing bodies of participating departments in a particular year. And the additional appropriation brings the state to this maximum allowed by statute. The second issue has to do with the financial audit done by the SAO in December of 2021. The audit identified several issues, with the summary being that the agency needed to strengthen its processes for monitoring and documenting fund transactions and following up on late payments. According to the agency, they have taken several steps to address these issues. And if you'll turn with me to page 4. And this is the agency's exceptional item. The agency's exceptional item would increase the salaries of staff other than the executive director by just under $124,000 over the biennium. The agency indicates this increase is due to high staff turnover and the difficulty of filling vacant positions. And this concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Members, any questions? Thank you. The chair calls Jerry Romero, Board Vice Chair, and Tiffany White, Executive Director for the Texas Emergency Services Retirement System.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Tiffany, good to see you.
Good seeing you again. For the record, my name is Jerry Romero. I'm the Vice Chair for the Testers Group, or Texas Emergency Service Retirement System. And again, thank you all for the work that you've done with HB1. I think it'll go a long ways towards addressing some of the issues that we have with staff. And it seems to be an underlying theme from a lot of the different agencies that are here today. Basically, Testers was created in 1977, and it's basically a system that's used to provide benefits and services to volunteer firefighters and departments across the state of Texas. So we basically serve about 238 departments across the state of Texas. In the presentation that you all have received, you'll see a map that really shows the distribution of these different volunteer organizations. I think the biggest misnomer that we have with volunteer firefighters versus firefighters that work for a city or for a county is that if you dress these two individuals up and you put them back to back, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, but that the volunteers are doing this on their own volition and out there trying to serve the communities that really don't have the services that are available to most large communities in the cities and counties. So we basically have a 9-member board that's appointed by the governor, and we try to manage the funds in the most optimal way that we can. Obviously, the market has been what it is lately. We've seen a decline in our funds, but we hope to bring that back as we manage the funds to ensure that we're not investing in anything that's outside of the realm of what we should be investing in as far as public funds are concerned. We serve about 3,900 active retirees and beneficiaries. We probably pay out in fiscal year 2022 about $8.3 million. So it's something that I feel is very important from the standpoint of serving communities that are underserved in general. We look forward to doing whatever we can to continue to compensate these individuals that are out there protecting these communities. More importantly, try to do what we can for our staff to ensure that we have qualified staff and that we can continue to hire staff when we do have some situations where we've lost staff. And with that, I'll let Ms. White make comments and introduce herself.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members. My name is Tiffany White. I serve as the Executive Director of the Texas Emergency Services Retirement System. Just wanted to bring your attention to our one exceptional item that's in your packet. Currently, as you know, our agency has an FTE cap of 10 employees. Right now, we are operating at 50%. We have 5 FTEs on staff. And so our exceptional item is requesting, been authorized by the board to request that each of the staff be compensated. Right now, they are at minimum. They've been hired and recruited at a minimum salary range according to the State Auditor's Office classification schedule. And we've been authorized to request that they be moved to the midpoint range of their current classification in order to remain competitive. And that comes to about $61,000 per year, about $124,000 with some other benefits associated with those positions. And that concludes our exceptional item request. And we hope that you will consider that, and happy to answer any questions that you may have in the prepared remarks that we have shared. Thank you.
Members, any questions? I just have a couple of questions. Looking at your map, it really seems that you are supporting not only those folks who are at the front lines, but communities that are more rural than urban. Does that feel accurate?
I would say that is correct. There was a big distribution of the departments that we work with, and we continually go out there to try to encourage other departments that are not members of Testers to have them participate so they can provide some additional benefits to the volunteer firefighters. So, but to your question, yes, it is very rural in a lot of these places.
And I see that y'all are already addressing some of the auditor's recommendations, but do you feel that by appropriating what you're asking for, you can continue to address the auditor's recommendations as they outlined?
Yes, I think so. I think our biggest issue right now is that we have gone through some transition. Mrs. White has been with the organization for approximately 6 months. In those 6 months, we had some additional individuals that departed the organization, and they had already given notice when Ms. White started, and then we had another two that have left since then. And all of the reasons for them leaving has been for additional money elsewhere. We've had several of them that have gone to work for other agencies within the state, and one that has gone to go work for the TSA.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Are there any other questions, members? Thank you for all y'all do.
Thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members.
The chair calls John Posey, analyst with the Legislative Budget Board.
My name is John Posey with the Legislative Budget Board. This time I'm going to be presenting recommendations for the Employees Retirement System, otherwise known as ERS. The vast majority of appropriations for this agency are estimates. Recommendations for all funds total $7.98 billion. And if you'll turn with me to page 2, on the top row, you'll see that recommendations increase ERS retirement by $227 million, or 16% over the biennium. On the bottom row there, that is item F, you'll see that the recommendations increase the group benefits program, this is health insurance, by $265.5 million, or 7%. And if you'll turn with me to page 3, the first item there is the ERS retirement system itself. There are assumptions listed in those bullet points there. First one is that payroll will grow approximately 0.77%. Some of the growth is also due to the statewide salary adjustment. Item 2 in the middle of the page discusses the implementation of Senate Bill 321 and discusses some of the specifics of the new Group 4. Item 3 near the bottom discusses the legacy payments to pay off the unfunded liability for the ERS retirement plan. The bullets there show the method of finance amounts in the supplemental bill of last session. The agency estimates a shortfall in those methods of finance primarily due to issues with federal funds. House Bill 1 funds legacy payments going forward purely with general revenue and State Highway Fund 6. And if you'll turn with me to page 4, at the top is the LACOS retirement program, and that is a retirement program for certain law enforcement officers. Recommendations total $808.2 million for the biennium. According to ERS, this plan is on a path to depletion, specifically estimated at the year 2045, and has an unfunded liability of $715 million. Not only is there significant unfunded liability, but according to ERS, current contributions are currently not sufficient to pay the normal cost of the program. Recommendations in House Bill 1 include $750 million in all funds to address the unfunded liability and $38.8 million to increase the state contribution to this fund. Item 5 in the middle of the page discusses the JRS-2 retirement fund. This is a retirement fund for judges. According to ERS, this fund is also on a path to depletion. ERS estimates that it will be depleted in the year 2069 and has an unfunded liability of $89 million. Recommendations include $105 million to address the unfunded liability and $6.5 million to increase the state contribution to this program, essentially to address the normal cost of the program. Item 6 is public safety death benefits. So this is a program for survivors of certain law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty. And you'll notice there that in last biennium, the estimates were about $13.8 million per year for this program. This time around, the estimates are $51.9 million per year. And according to ERS, this increase is due to deaths from COVID-19. Item 17 is the group benefits program or health insurance. you'll notice that the first bullet, the assumption there is that the state will continue to contribute the full amount for member-only group insurance and 50% of family coverage. And if you'll turn with me to page 5, more assumptions there, including at the top that retiree membership will grow 3.5% and active membership will grow 1%. In the middle of the page there's a chart showing the net cost or net impact of COVID-19 on the group benefits program. Between claims for cases, diagnostic testing, and vaccine administration, the total cost to the plan was $165.1 million. However, fewer medical services unrelated to COVID-19 brought a decrease of $57.8 million. So the net cost impact to the group benefits plan in fiscal year 2021 was $107.3 million. Item 8, the table in the middle shows Health Select cost trends. And you'll notice that most of those costs, most of the increases are due to increases in prescription drugs. Item 8 at the bottom is the contingency reserve fund balance. This is a fund balance, a reserve fund just for the group benefits program. ERS expects this fund to be depleted sometime in the year, fiscal year 2027, mostly due to increases in healthcare expenditures. And if you'll turn with me to page 6, we have a graph on this contingency reserve fund balance. You'll notice it peaks in 2023 and then starts declining from there down to 2027. Sometime in that year, ERS expects that fund to be depleted. The last item is item 9. ERS is a trust, and they have 4 funds. And these funds are expected to have a total balance of $37.3 billion at the beginning of fiscal year 2024. And if you'll turn with me to page 7. So these are rider changes. ERS has an informational rider in their bill pattern, which reflects benefits recommendations across all articles for the biennium, and we've updated this rider with the new totals. There are 2 riders in Article 9, and they reflect that agencies pay a 0.5% contribution to retirement and 1.0% contribution to health insurance. And these estimates have been updated for the current biennium. And if you'll turn with me to page 8. So this is the agency's exceptional item. So ERS's LAR contained exceptional items related to the unfunded liability of the JRS2 program and the Lake-Coast Retirement Program. And what has happened is since they turned in their LAR, they've had another actuarial evaluation, new data, new costs, and so they have been updated, and you can see that the all funds cost there is sitting at $24.9 million for the biennium. Of note, the agency has a rider that requires them to do another actuarial evaluation as of the end of this coming February, so they're likely to produce more data and new numbers then sometime in March. And this concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Members, any questions? I might have, Representative Spiller.
Scott, just briefly, you'd said back on the legacy payments under item 3 above that there was a shortfall, and you said issues with the federal funding. Could you elaborate on that or explain kind of what those issues were?
Yes, sure. So the agency was, in House Bill 2, there was an estimated, or the appropriation in federal funds was $171.4 million for a 2-year period, and the shortfall is expected to be $157.7 million. And the reason for that is that, ERS, working with the comptroller and the agencies in the federal government, found that to access some of these federal funds, there were going to be issues where the agencies might have to reduce programs. And sometimes the federal regulations wouldn't allow it. So a combination of both of those things.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I know you have another packet on Social Security.
I do.
Wouldn't you want to do that one first before I release you from here?
Oh, sure. Okay, so now the new packet, much smaller. Social Security and benefit replacement pay. All of the appropriations for these items are estimates. Recommendations for the 2024-25 biennium total $2.2 billion in all funds, which is an increase of $234 million from 2022-23. And if you'll turn with me to page 2, this page shows the summary of those funding changes, and I'm going to discuss them a little bit more. Page 3. So we'll discuss Social Security first. So recommendations for Social Security total $237.3 million, or an increase of they increased Social Security by $237.3 million, or 12% over the biennium. The assumptions include payroll growth of 0.77%. You'll notice the employer contribution rates on the first bullet. These rates are set by federal law, and we assume that the federal law doesn't change. The second item is benefit replacement pay. Please note that this benefit only applies to employees hired before September 1st of 1995. Recommendations decrease all funds for this benefit by $3.2 million over the biennium. Because of increased turnover among employees covered by this benefit, recommendations assume annual reductions of 20.1%. And if you'll turn with me to page 4. So much like ERS, the comptroller has an informational rider regarding Social Security and benefit replacement pay that covers all articles, and this rider has been updated for the new numbers and a new biennium. And this concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Members, any questions? Thank you so much. The chair calls Porter Wilson, Executive Director for the Employees and Retirement System of Texas. Hey, Porter. Hey, Porter, we're going to put something on the mic so it's not as sensitive.
Okay.
I mean, you can still sit, but.
Get all my. Knock it off here. Good morning, Madam Chair. Porter Wilson, Executive Director of ERS. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thanks to LBB for the comprehensive layout. I don't really have too much to add as far as the appropriations sort of piece of the testimony goes, other than to say thank you for what's in the base bill. I think John did a great job of describing what's in there. I can, as far as the technical adjustment that goes with that, but I'll briefly walk through the slides that have been provided, and thought I'd just sort of lay out sort of a little profile of the state workforce at this point. On page 2 of my presentation, you can see currently there are, on the last column there, 133,000 contributing employees right now. Just to give you some context as far as size goes, that's the least amount of state employees we've had since roughly 2012. And that was shortly after a hiring freeze that occurred in 2011. So you can see that there's a smaller number. Those numbers are roughly the same generally as there have been since 1993. So the state workforce has been pretty stable over the last 30 years in relative size, in general size. The bottom line are retirees. You can see a big growth in retirees. This is what you might expect. With sort of the baby boomers moving through retirement here. We've gone from 107,000 retirees in 2017 to 122. I think the number, though, that's most interesting on here is the middle column, the non-contributing members. These are state employees. These are folks that have come to state employment and then left, and they've left their money with ERS. And you can see between 2021 and 2022 a pretty sizable increase there in the growth of folks who've come to state workforce. And I think that just speaks to sort of turnover and kind of what's been going on in the workforce in general. Just to give you an idea, we started a new benefit on September 1st, Group 4, that was directed from the legislature last session. There are already 8,000 new employees from September till today, roughly, in that, and already 450 people who have left. That have come since September and left. So that's around 5% or so of folks that have come and gone already. So you can see then at the bottom the profile of the retiree, about a $21,000 annuity annually, and then sort of the state employee information there, the years of service and their salary as well. I think one of the things that's interesting on the next chart is that of those 134,000 employees, 70% of them come from basically 5 agencies. You've got the Health and Human Services Commission, which is the largest, about 33,000 employees, and half of those folks are working at either a state-supported living center or a state hospital. The next one in size is TDCJ with 30,000 employees, and 60% of those folks are correctional officers in the prisons themselves. TxDOT comes in at third place with almost 13,000 employees, and a third of those folks are maintenance specialists, folks out there working on the roads themselves. DFPS at 12,000, about half of those folks are actual caseworkers, CPS caseworkers, half of that 12,000. And then rounding out the top 5 is DPS with around 10,000 employees, a third of whom are law enforcement officers. Again, just sort of to give you an idea of who's making up the workforce, the substantial piece of the workforce. I'll move to slide number 5 next, which kind of talks about our retirement plans. John did a great job of describing what those are. We actually have 4 plans that we administer, retirement plans, 3 of which are pre-funded, 1 of which is pay-as-you-go. The ERS plan, the main ERS plan, the Law Enforcement Custodial Officer Supplemental Plan, and JRS 2 are all pre-funded. JRS 1 is a program for judges that took the bench before 1986, and it's a pay-as-you-go plan, very small plan and getting smaller, actually. I think it's also important to note that state employees not only participate in the retirement programs, but also in the Social Security program. You heard John describe that program. So all state employees contribute both to the pension plan, but also to Social Security, which is somewhat unusual for the public sector employees. And then sort of the third leg of our 3-legged stool that we talk about as far as retirement preparation goes is our 401k and our 457 plans. These are totally voluntary, but we do opt all new state employees automatically into that 401k plan at 1%. And we have about a 70% stick rate, if you will, those folks that stay with that, and then we encourage them to add to that as well and build on that for their retirement security. Next page, since investments is a substantial piece of how we fund retirement benefits, I thought I would show investment returns over the last 20-year period. 60%, 63 cents basically of every dollar that's paid out in benefits comes from investment returns, and you can see our returns there. Despite the 1-year return being somewhat challenged, I will say we did outperform our benchmark by almost an equivalent amount, 1.6%, but still markets were challenging last year. Get to the slide number 7. Coming into last legislative session, as John mentioned, all of the pension funds that are pre-funded that we administer were on a path to running out of money. Roughly $34 billion in assets that we have. Those were going to be gone at some point in the relatively near future, and we would have to pay as we go. As you can see, coming out of last legislative session, the main ERS fund was shored up with the passage of Senate Bill 321, legacy payment, $510 million, fixed dollar amount over a 34-year period, 33-year period that would pay that down over time, as well as a change in benefits to a new cash balance benefit. However, those law enforcement benefits, supplemental benefits, and the JRS2 weren't addressed last legislative session, and they were all, as John mentioned, on a path to depletion, and you can see the years in there. Next page, though, is the dramatic change that occurs with the dollars included in House Bill 1. Again, you can see the main ERS fund continues to be on a path to being sound in 31 years. But with that extra $1 billion one-time payment that's put in there, instead of being fully funded in 2054, it's fully funded in 2049. So you knock 5 years off that amortization schedule. And then for the LECOS and JRS2 plans, would be 100% funded, no unfunded liability, and the normal costs being covered. Just to give you an idea on the next slide of what that does as far as savings goes, you can see there that $1 billion payment, that $750 million payment to the LECOS, that $105 million payment to pay off those unfunded liabilities or pay down the unfunded liabilities in the ERS case, and LECOS and JRS2 pay them off, saves you about $6.8 billion in interest over the life of those payments. So really a great investment and way to pay that down. John mentioned our exceptional item on page 10 of our presentation being updated. This is just really a matter of timing. When the LARs are due and our joint budget hearing and boards of review are going on, we don't have our most updated numbers. We're working on really almost year-old data at that point. The valuation is a snapshot at the end of the fiscal year, but that presentation isn't ready until December. So it was presented to our board at our December board meeting, and the numbers that we're providing you here are updated numbers relative to that. I will mention, again, as John mentioned, that there is another update to that actuarial evaluation that happens directed by Ryder at the end of this month. So in a week, we'll be taking a snapshot at the end of February, preparing our valuation, and we'll hope to have that to you very quickly. My hope is that we can get that to you within a week or two, hopefully by the mid-month in March, so that you could decisions that you're making could update those numbers if you wish. Healthcare, John mentioned it. Again, we didn't have a request. This is the same as has been the case since 2019. The last time we requested an increase in this healthcare item was in 2017, and that was a less than 1% increase at the time. Those premiums have stayed the same since 2019, which is really a combination of factors contributing to that. One is management of healthcare costs, trying to keep people engaged in managing their health up front, but also us negotiating really great rates, not just good rates, but the best absolute rates that we can get for the state from providers. And then finally, John mentioned the 615 benefits, those public safety officer benefits. We don't usually talk about this item. It's a program that we administer, but is fully funded 100% by general revenue from the state. But because of that growth that John mentioned, I thought it important to come and talk about a little bit some of those drivers, one of which was a number of years back, that benefit was indexed to inflation. And so the legislature directed the ERS Board of Trustees to adopt an increase in that benefit equivalent to the CPIU, Consumer Price Index, Urban Communities Index. And so it used to be about at 500,000, and you can see there kind of what's happened over time as we've applied that inflation factor, and now that benefit is at $555,000. We'll update it again, and obviously with inflation at 5-6%, that number would go up probably to 583,000. Again, that benefit, just so you know, triggers is connected to when the death occurs. Mm-hmm. So the benefit that the survivors are eligible for relates to the year in which the death occurred. And we've had a almost 4x increase in the number of deaths that we've seen under this program. We used to have about 25 a year, and in 2022 there were almost 130 deaths, a lot of those related to COVID. And that's it.
Thank you, Porter. Yes. Members, do you have any questions for Porter? I have questions, but yes. Okay. Going back to slide 2.
Yes.
Can you explain the implications and what it means for us to have higher non-contributing members compared to contributing members?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real, sort of caution here as the small number of contributing members is that the state contributes 10% of an employee's salary to pay for those benefits, and the employee contributes 9.5%. That combined total is not only paying for the cost of the benefit, but also paying off a piece of the unfunded liability. So about, I'll say 9.5% of that combined 19% contribution, about 9.5% of that is going to pay off the unfunded liability, in addition to your legacy payment, so both pieces. So as you have fewer employees, that 9.5% that's going to the unfunded liability is smaller than expected. Now, the way 310 is Senate Bill 321 was styled, that legacy payment should adjust and could grow as a result of that to pay off the unfunded liability. But bottom line is you're just seeing less money come in that's there to pay off that unfunded liability. And I think from a non-contributing member, I think that's really more of it's just a turnover issue. Again, not necessarily my job to be, in my particular role, to be looking at sort of the challenges of workforce. But when you see these kinds of numbers where non-contributing members growing, it just means that you're having lots of turnover in your workforce. And you're seeing people that are coming and leaving their money with us. And some of them are pulling their money out. That's not necessarily an issue. It's really just, I think, a workforce, sort of an insight into your workforce as to what's going on was sort of the piece I wanted to raise with you.
And I hear you, it's a data point for workforce analysis, but there isn't an impact to ERS, particularly in these like shifts of high turnover?
Yeah, I think in the LECOS program, there could be an issue because we don't have sort of the same legacy payment. The legacy payment is actually an actuarially calculated number. It's 510 in the base bill, but it could be bigger. It could be smaller at some point in time if you were to set it according to actuarial calculations. There's not a similar sort of provision for the law enforcement custodial officer program. So as you see high turnover, that unfunded liability, we could see a developing unfunded liability in the LECOS supplemental fund if that were to occur. But
okay, I think it's good to know.
Yeah.
Is there anything just really important for us to, obviously you told us what we need to know, but anything that as legislature should be highly aware of as we go into budget continuation conversations?
No, we're ready to work with you and answer any questions as they come up. I know they will as y'all are working through each of the agencies' budgets, and we're here to provide data as quickly and as we can. So we're here for you.
Well, I look forward to seeing your report in a couple weeks. Members, any other questions? All right. Thanks, Porter.
Thank you.
The chair calls George Purcell, analyst with the Legislative Budget Board.
Good morning. My name is George Purcell. I will now be presenting the summary of recommendations for the Texas Ethics Commission. The first page of the packet presents the high-level overview of the agency. Overall, the recommendations would increase the appropriations for the Ethics Commission by $254,000, just under 4% from the 2022-23 biennium. Turning to page 2, Item A shows the source. Items A and B show the source of this increase. Additional general revenue provided in the base bill to complete the transition of the agency's electronic filing system to the cloud, and funding provided for the statewide salary increase. These increases are offset to a degree by the removal of one-time funding for enhancements to that electronic filing system. Turning to page 3. There are 2 included items as policy issues. The first item shows the reduction in the introduced bill of the agency's FTE cap. As this chart shows, the agency has been significantly below its cap for many years. It is below this cap for structural reasons. The agency has been unable to recruit and retain technical staff and attorneys. In its LAR, the agency identified 6 of its CAP FTEs as being unfunded and requested an exceptional item to fund these positions. The introduced bill pulls these FTEs back so that they can be associated with that exceptional item decision. The agency has since revised that initial exceptional item to request funds for those 6 FTEs, as well as 2 additional FTEs previously included in another exceptional item. It is listed as exceptional item 3 in this packet, and the agency is requesting $1.1 million for this purpose. The second item, selected fiscal and policy issue, concerns the electronic filing system used by the agency to handle candidate disclosure forms, among other reporting requirements. Last June, the existing hardware-based system failed when large disclosure filings from the gubernatorial candidates were attempted. Prior to the failure, the agency had included an exceptional item for $748,000 for a future transition to the cloud. Following the failure, the agency decided to begin this transition immediately in an attempt to have a working system in place for the final filing deadline of the election cycle in October. The agency requested and received a deficiency grant of $200,000 from the Office of the Governor for the purchase of Amazon Web Services for this purpose. In our investigations, we discovered that the agency had accumulated a balance of $882,000 in pre-purchase services for the electronic filing system with their existing contractor. The agency applied this balance towards the cloud transition. In addition, the introduced bill includes $247,000 identified as needed to complete the transition in the upcoming biennium. The introduced bill includes a new rider that requires the agency to report future electronic filing system vendor transactions, as well as to consult with DIR about a potential move of the EFS to the statewide data center services. Turning to page 4. The Appropriations for Retirement Payments rider has been updated to reflect information from the agency about estimated potential retirement costs. This rider is out of funds appropriated and does not represent an increase in their base appropriation. And as I noted above, the recommendations include that reporting rider for the electronic filing system. Turning to page 5, this section shows 8 exceptional items and 1 rider request made by the agency. These total $3.2 million. I do want to draw your attention to item 8 on page 6. Sorry, to item 1 on page 6. Lump sum and retirement payments would provide, item 8 on page 5. Lump sum and retirement payments is a request by the agency to provide additional funding to the agency for the appropriation of retirements payment rider I noted earlier. Note that because this rider does not include UB, unexpended balances, either within or between biennium, the entire agency estimated amount is requested in each year of the biennium. Also, it's worth noting that if these individuals do not retire, these funds lapse. This lapse then reduces the agency's base for the upcoming biennium. This concludes my presentation.
Members, y'all have any questions, Mr. Purcell? All right. Not the chair calls, thank you very much, I appreciate it. The chair calls Randy Urban, vice chair, and also James.
He's a sub.
Oh, okay.
James Tinley.
Okay, General Counsel.
Chair members, I'm Randy Urban. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Texas Ethics Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. Our Executive Director, J.R. Johnson, has COVID, so we decided not to bring him down here. And instead, we're going to have our very capable General Counsel, Jim Tinley, make the agency presentation.
Good morning, Chair and members. Jim Tinley, I'm General Counsel for the Texas Ethics Commission, and it's my great honor to present this budget, our budget proposal to you and answer any questions you may have. It's a great honor that I learned I'd have yesterday, so I'll do my best to fill in for JR. And if there's any questions that we're unable to answer today, we're very happy to get back in touch with you with those answers. The Texas Ethics Commission has more filers and more filings than ever before, which affects the workload of every division in the agency. For example, in 2022, late filings were up 36% from the year before. Complaints were up 50% from the previous 5-year annual average. The Texas Ethics Commission has over 30,000 filers, which is nearly twice that the Federal Elections Commission handles. And we also receive over 160,000 filings each year, and that's up 500% from 2015. In the face of that growth, the TEC has fewer employees than at nearly any other point in recent history, and nearly every position that is filled is undercompensated compared to other agencies in Texas. For example, the average salary for a TEC attorney is less than the Medical Board, the Commission on Judicial Conduct, the Department of Banking, just to name a few. Underpaying leads to turnover, and TEC's turnover rate has exceeded state agency average for the past 2 years. As an example, one of the TEC's most experienced attorneys, who is classified with the TEC as an attorney 2 because of our budget constraints, left for an attorney 4 position with another agency. And sort of anticipating some of the questions that the chair had before, we do have exit interviews and we have looked, and typically for the data that we do have, our leaving employees, especially our attorneys, are going to other state agencies where they are receiving between $10,000 and $15,000 more than what they were being paid with the TEC. These are the people who are making important decisions every day about how the law is applied, decisions that affect every candidate and office holder in the state. These are decisions that we want to get right the first time, but we need to be able to hire and retain talented attorneys to be able to do that, and talented staff as well, besides attorneys. We recognize and certainly appreciate the across-the-board raises that are included in HB1, but we're requesting additional funding to pay our staff to the SAO midpoint salaries for their classifications. Because one of our biggest challenges is losing our employees to other state agencies who could afford to pay more. Also, our first exceptional item is to increase the salary of the one exempt position in our budget that was not subject to either the 5% or the agency head pay raise. It happens to be the position of general counsel, so full disclosure there.
That's not awkward at all.
No, absolutely not, no. And we're also requesting 8 FTEs. So those include 6 that the budget bill proposes to cut from the budget, and then 2 additional more. Those include a project manager to help us deal with our, using all of our enhancement hours to improve our filing system, to shepherd that project along, as well as someone to provide tech support to filers that are people who are hired as computer programmers who currently have to field a lot of those calls, are able to do computer programming, and I think that will help improve our our customer service as well as our efficiency of the agency. We have 5 additional exception items and 1 rider adjustment, but in the interest of time, I will stop there and answer any questions you may have.
Members, any questions? Representative Jarvis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does your agency levy fines against elected officials?
We do.
Why in the world would I then increase your salary so that you can then come give me more fines when I'm 30 minutes late on a filing? It just doesn't make sense to me. I don't even want no answer, man. I'm just telling you, I'm not going to give no more money to this agency. I'm just joking. Well, I'm just teasing.
I appreciate. So the additional FTEs that I will note, the additional FTEs that we are requesting are not in enforcement. They're, and I will, and in terms of late fines, we do have, I think, pretty generous rules for reducing and waiving those fines if there's something that has come up that was sort of unavoidable, or there was a history of late filing.
Good answer.
Members, any other questions? Just thank you for all that you do. Randy, you're not registered, so if you don't mind, will you register for us? And yeah, okay, y'all are good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The chair calls KJ Curtis, analyst with the Legislative Budget Board.
All right, hello again. I am KJ Curtis with the Legislative Budget Board, presenting the summary of budget recommendations for the Texas Historical Commission. So starting on page 1, recommendations for the 24-25 biennium include an all funds total of about $75 million, reflecting a decrease of about $59.5 million from the 22-23 biennium. At the bottom of the page, you'll also notice that recommendations include an overall increase of 41 FTEs, which is offset by a decrease of 5 due to the ending of a federal grant related to Hurricane Harvey. Turning to page 2, at the top of the page, item A shows a combined decrease of $61.6 million made up of general revenue, ARPA, and economic stabilization funding. Item B shows a decrease of $0.4 million in sporting goods sales tax due to the agency carrying forward and spending down balances, and I'll go into more info on this in the next section. At the bottom of the page, you'll see other funding changes in general revenue dedicated, federal funds, and other funds. But if we move to page 3, I'll call your attention to item J, showing the increase in general revenue for program support at non-historic sites, and item K showing the increase across general revenue and federal funds for the exempt and non-exempt salary adjustment. Turning to page 4. Item 1 describes those one-time funding decreases related to capital projects and grants in the 22-23 biennium, totaling $61.6 million across general revenue, ARPA, and economic stabilization funding. The 3 largest funding projects include the courthouse preservation grants, the Washington on the Brazos site, and the National Museum of the Pacific War. Moving down the page to item 2, you'll see it discusses sporting goods sales tax. The Historical Commission is statutorily allocated 7% of sporting goods sales tax receipts, which are authorized to be spent on 28 named sites in Chapter 442, Subchapter C of the Government Code. The recommended amount of about $35 million for the 24-25 biennium was based on the fiscal years 22 and 23 allocation estimate in the July 2022 certification revenue estimates. However, with the January 2023 biennial revenue estimates, sporting goods sales tax allocations are estimated to be $33.2 million, and so a reduction of $1.8 million would be required to align appropriations with estimates from the comptroller. Moving to page 5. In rider highlights, you'll see most riders show modification to clarify statute, standardized language, or reflect the 24-25 biennium. Looking at the top of the page, recommendations for the capital budget include provided authority to carry forward balances from 22-23 into 24-25 for the Mission Socorro land acquisition, the Washington on the Brazos, the Star of the Republic Museum, and the courthouse grant projects. The capital budget also includes a continuation of funding for historic sites deferred maintenance at $2.2 million. A new project was added for building complex improvements for the agency's Capitol Complex offices. And the capital projects also include the continuation of funding for IT and data services. Moving lower towards the bottom of the page, I'll draw your attention to Rider 11, the Texas Preservation Trust Fund, account number 664. The rider change included in recommendations was requested by the agency to align with estimated earnings from the corpus of the fund. Moving on to page 6, I'll just draw your attention to the bottom of this list where there are recommendations include 2 new riders to provide unexpended balance authority for the Washington on the Brazos and Mission Socorro archaeological sites. Moving on to page 7. Pages 7 and 8 show the agency's exceptional items not included in recommendations. The agency has provided an update to these items. There are 15 items on this list totaling $219.2 million and 1 FTE. And if you turn to page 8, you'll see item 15 is the new exceptional item requested by the agency, including that 1 FTE I mentioned, to support the Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission. It's our understanding that all items on this list, excluding number 4 and number 15, will be addressed in the supplemental bill. And finally, at the bottom of page 8, you'll see the agency's requested rider revision not included in recommendations. And this concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much. Members, do you have any questions? Thank you. The chair calls Catherine McKnight, Vice Chair of the Texas Historical Commission.
Good morning, Madam Chair Gonzalez and committee members. My name is Catherine McKnight. I'm Vice Chair of the Texas Historical Commission. With me today is Mark Wolf, our Executive Director, as well as Joy Nathan, the Executive Director of the Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Commission. Madam Chair and members, Texas history shapes our culture, inspires our entrepreneurs and innovators, and drives economic development and revenue. The total impact of historic preservation in Texas is more than $4.6 billion annually, and it supports 79,000 jobs. Our courthouse preservation program is important to economic development, job creation, and community pride. The THC has helped fund 78 full restorations, and about 70 more courthouses qualify for and desperately need restoration. We respectfully ask that you consider appropriating $45 million in House Bill 1 to continue this important program, and very much support the establishment of a safekeeping trust fund as an endowment account that could support this program into the future. THC's core work is historic preservation, and we do this across Texas. But the best example of our work is in our stewardship of the 36 state historic sites. These are landmarks that define and support local economies, draw visitors from around the world, and preserve Texas history and culture. All of us at THC want to thank you for HB 1 and for all the projects at state historic sites that you are considering for funding in the Supplemental Appropriations Act. The major work needed at San Jacinto, one of the world's most important battlegrounds, is very important to the long-term goal of telling the complete story of the Texas Revolution. Our request also includes $7.5 million for the National Museum of the Pacific War. For our continued success, we need to ensure that we have staff to run these sites and to carry out all the other programs we manage across the state. That's why we've requested 25 FTEs for our Historic Sites program and 16 FTEs for other agency programs. These FTEs will provide staff for San Jacinto, the Bush Family Home, Presidio La Bahia, the Goodnight Ranch, San Felipe de Austin, Sabine Pass Battleground, and at Fort Griffin, where we maintain the official state longhorn herd. Additional positions will help support IT operations statewide, manage more than 200 covenants we hold on historic buildings, and support our very popular cemetery program. While HB 1 provides us with much of the support we greatly need, we have a few additional items to ask today. We need a little less than $300,000 each biennium to allow us to provide computers and related IT equipment for our growing staff, many of whom work at remote locations, keeping our state historic sites operating. We also need a capital authority rider to spend $2.5 million on sites deferred maintenance. I also want to note that the Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission, administratively attached to the THC, is requesting $200,000 annually and one additional FTE to allow them to perform the expanded assignment the legislature gave them when they added work against anti-Semitism to their mission. That request was just added last month, so it wasn't in our initial LAR, but was added at the request of that commission's executive chairman and executive director. Thank you for the continued support for the Texas Historical Commission and our mission to preserve real places telling real stories of Texas. Our work improves economic development, increases revenue, and creates jobs. It educates and inspires Texans, young and old, multi-generational, and especially the many new Texans moving to our state. Texas is a unique place, and Texas history plays a big part. Preserving Texas history makes us stronger, smarter, more understanding, and more prosperous as a state. Thank you for allowing me to highlight the Texas Historical Commission and our budget needs, and I want to thank you for your time today and service to the people of Texas. At this time, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Members, any questions or further questions before we move into public testimony? If not, thank you all very much. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Okay, members, that concludes our invited testimony for today. We'll now begin the public testimony. Testimony be limited to 5 minutes per person to allow time for questions and comments from the members of the committee. And the chair first calls Amanda Aubrey. And if you would, Amanda, please state your name and organization for the record when you get here.
Going once, going twice.
All right. We may circle back to Amanda. Let's see. Next is Liz Boyce.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for having me, committee members. And I thank you. My name is Liz Boyce. I am the General Counsel for the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. I'm the General Counsel, and I'm here to testify in support of your base budget that you've recommended. I am here to represent our membership, which consists of sexual assault survivors, rape crisis centers across the state, law enforcement, medical professionals, and community members. On behalf of this membership, we want to say thank you and express our sincere gratitude to you for prioritizing this issue and for giving us the funds needed to close the gaps across the state in services. Currently, less than a third of all Texas counties have access to a rape crisis center in their boundaries. There are many that don't have access to a rape crisis center at all. So this money is going to go and save lives. It's going to be very critically important to many people in this state. And we just thank you for prioritizing this today. And we're here for to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Ms. Boyce? All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate you. Next is Cyrus Reed.
Yes, thanks, Cyrus.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Cyrus Reed. I'm here on behalf of the Lone Star chapter of the Sierra Club. You're probably wondering what I'm doing here in Article 1. I'm here to talk about my good friend Glenn Hagar and the comptroller, but really talk about the fiscal programs within the comptroller. They have a relatively small office called the State Energy Conservation Office, or SECO. Doesn't have a lot of employees, but is an important agency nonetheless. One, because it runs the Lone Star program, which is a revolving loan program to make our public buildings or school districts or state agency buildings more energy efficient, which saves us money and also helps the planet. So within that budget, there is money already earmarked, and we support that. There's also important federal money, mainly because of the bipartisan infrastructure bill that is coming to SECO. We want to make sure that SECO has the flexibility to spend that money. We believe they do within HB1 as filed, but did have a concern because the comptroller mentioned with all the additional federal funding coming down, SECO might be overwhelmed in terms of their staffing. So our suggestion, and there's a lot of there's 3 pages in here, and I'm not going to read them, but you can read them at your leisure. There are a number of programs that they could be eligible for, including some important rebate programs for energy efficiency for residential folks. That's a lot of money. So we are suggesting 2 things. One, if SECO doesn't have the staff, have an MOU with PUC, other agencies, to help administer that funding. And 2, let's make sure we report on all this federal funding. And also, importantly, because we are facing air pollution issues with ozone, make sure that we get credit for any funding we spend, which lowers air pollution. Let's get credit from the EPA. El Paso, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio all have ozone issues. That is something that SECO already does with some of their programs. So let's make sure as we get more federal funding, we take advantage of that and get credit from weight of evidence credit from EPA for lowering ozone. So there's more stuff written in here, but I won't read it because y'all can read. And welcome to the new members who I don't know yet. So thank you very much. So,
Thanks, Cyrus. And I just want you to know I did read your letter before, and so really appreciate your support of the Comptroller's Office.
thanks.
The chair calls Rahul. Gosh, Rahul, I know you're. I mean, I don't want to mess up. Rahul, I'm so sorry.
I'll take a shot on the microphone.
Okay, Srinivasan. Is that
There you
right?
go.
There we go. I knew it. There we go.
Thank you, Chair Gonzalez, Vice Chair Spiller, members of the Appropriations Subcommittee on 145. My name is Rahul Srinivasan. I'm a policy advisor with Texas 2036. We're a data-driven, nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to creating policy solutions as Texas approaches its bicentennial. This session with the fund balance and the revenue outlook that we're anticipating, we're focusing on generationally impactful investments while preserving long-term fiscal sustainability. And I'm going to ask real quick, Chair, do you want me to testify? I have comments on ERS and on the comptroller. Do you want me?
Yeah.
They're not long, so.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, regarding the comptroller's budget, want to commend leadership for raising the FTE cap in the Broadband Development Office from 5 to 23. Raising cap will allow the office to more efficiently allocate the influx of federal broadband dollars and speed up the implementation of the state broadband plan. As the comptroller discussed, the passage of the IIJA, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, means states are going to be eligible for another tranche of funds, assisting in rolling out broadband via the ACT's Broadband Equity and Access to Employment Program. When the FCC maps are finalized later this year, we'll be eligible to draw down the billions that he noted. But the thing I wanted to talk about is that there is a match component, minimum 25% match component that can be met via various combinations of private and public resources. But our comments are that however this match is met, that we recommend that stakeholders and the legislature work towards plan to ensure Texas maximizes its federal broadband dollars. Texas 2036 has a new voter poll that will be coming out tomorrow, and in there we had a question asking voters on how important they believe, and 88% of voters indicated that it was important for Texas to draw down the maximum amount of federal dollars to support broadband, including 64% saying very important or extremely important. On ERS, as budget writers grapple with the how to pay for tax relief and other investments with recurring costs for future legislatures, one of the best ways to reduce that burden is by reducing our future liabilities. HB1's recommendations for ERS do just that. And thanks to the work of Chair Vaughn and Huffman and SB 321, the two $510 million payments, legacy payments in HB1 will continue the fund's path towards actuarial soundness and eliminating its unfunded liability by 2054. Additionally, the $900 million allocation y'all heard about LECOS and JRS2 is precisely the type of fiscally sound allocation that will get the state's books in orders. The front-loaded approach will address this addressing this unfunded liability in a front-loaded manner is going to save the state $1.4 billion over the next 31 years. So additionally, I also want to comment on the supplemental, the lump sum $1 billion ERS line item in Article 9. And it's an example of another fiscally sound choice in this revenue cycle that future legislatures will thank the 88th for. The $1 billion will save future interest payments of approximately $5.5 billion over the next 31 years. This is another place that I think I can't remember if ERS mentioned it, but I mean, if the legislature put another billion in this, they would save a total of $9.5 billion over the next 31 years. But that's all I have for comments today. I want to thank y'all for your time, and if y'all have any questions, I'm happy to answer them the best I can.
I don't have a question, but what is 2036 doing to socialize the idea that investing the additional billion would result in a $9.5 billion savings to the state?
I would say this is probably part of it. I think there's a lot of open-ended spending items that we're kind of deferring to y'all to make the call, because there are a lot of things that, in terms of investment in infrastructure and in just a lot of recurring costs, the cost of budget, that I think we're trying to socialize.
Right.
And we're kind of leaving it up to y'all on in terms of prioritizing. But again, reducing long-term liabilities is one of the choices that we talk about in terms of money that you invest now that, like I said, future legislatures will thank you for doing. So
for the freshman members, that's probably something extremely important. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Rahul.
Yeah.
Any other questions, members? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ann Graham?
Guess it's kind of good morning still, maybe not good afternoon yet. My name is Ann Graham. I'm Executive Director of Texans for the Arts, statewide arts advocacy organization. Texans for the Arts fully supports the Texas Commission on the Arts appropriation requests, including both exceptional item number 1 and 2, with an additional request outlined below as shown on the handouts that you just received. My remarks build on those of Dr. Gary Gibbs, Executive Director of the TCA and the Texas Cultural Trust, who will report after me, about how impactful this small but mighty state agency is and what more could be accomplished with increasing funding for the TCA. Public funding for arts and creativity is a high-return investment in every town and rural community nationwide, not only in bigger cities. Public funding improves the lives of all Texans and reaches your constituents, equipping an innovative workforce and sparking economic development. Speaking to exceptional item number 1, the TCA's request for a $3 million increase for arts organization grants. We make an additional request for $5 million over that for the biennium for the Arts Organization Grant Program for a total of $8 million. The Arts Organization Grant Program provides cornerstone grants, organizational and operational, that focus on the legislator's legislative priority areas and that show the depth and breadth of how the arts impact our society, including arts and economic development, arts and public safety and criminal justice, arts and education, arts, health and human services, and arts and natural resources and agriculture. As you heard from Dr. Gibbs, the line item for these grants has not increased since 2014, yet there is an enormous need in communities across the state. In answer, Chairwoman, to your earlier question, there was an increase in population from 27 to 30 million in 22 since the allocations were made. Yet the agency, in fiscal year 22 alone, there were over $30 million in organizational grant requests, yet the agency only had funding to provide $5 million in grants, leaving $25 million in unmet need. The Texans for the Arts fully supports the TCA's request to increase this program, again, by $3 million over the biennium. But again, we request the additional $5 million in funding to chip away at the unmet needs across the state. This unmet need is really an unmet opportunity for communities all across Texas. The arts fuel our imagination, they stimulate business activity, attract tourism, expand a state's workforce and tax base. The arts are part of a sustainable strategy for revitalizing rural areas and cities, and Texas creative capacity sparks innovation. The Texas Cultural Trust will speak momentarily to the second exceptional item about our joint support for TCA for a $5 million increase for cultural districts. I want to affirm our support for that as well. The arts and cultural industries are big business in Texas, generating $6.1 billion in annual taxable sales, $380 million in annual sales tax revenue, and providing 1 in 15 jobs. That's research based on the SOTAR, the State of the Arts report from the Texas Cultural Trust based on numbers from the Comptroller's Office. Creativity fuels our economy. It fuels our state. It fuels our businesses. It fuels our people. Texas leads with creativity. We urge you to invest generously in the arts, culture, and creative industries to propel our state into the future with imagination and strength by fully funding the TCA's exceptional items 1 and 2 with the additional $5 million for exceptional items number 1. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
So, and thank you for all of your advocacy. Yes. So you're saying for an additional $5 million on top of the agency's request?
Yes, for exceptional item number 1. And you'll hear remarks shortly for cultural districts. That's exceptional item 2. So Dr. Gibbs was requesting $3 million for the organizational, and we're requesting an additional 5 on that for 8 over the biennium for exceptional item number 1. Did I make that?
It makes a lot of sense. It makes complete sense, and I'm glad that you're advocating for it. I just wanted to be sure to note that you're not just saying fund the exceptional item 1, you're saying fund and add.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ann. Any other questions, members?
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Nancy Seliger? Hi, Nancy.
My name is Nancy Seliger, and I'm a board member for the Texas Cultural Trust, and I'm the week stand-in today for Heidi Marquez-Smith, who's getting ready for our Texas Medal of the Arts Awards. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today in support of the Texas Commission on the Arts Exceptional Items 1 and 2. For those who don't know, the Texas Cultural Trust is a statewide nonprofit dedicated to supporting and increasing awareness and access for the arts across Texas. We do this as an active partner with the Texas Commission on the Arts. You just heard from Ann Graham and our friends at Texans for the Arts on the importance of exceptional item number 1, so I'm just going to speak to exceptional item number 2. The economic benefit of the arts to Texas is substantial. The arts and culture industry generates more than $6 billion with a B annually in taxable sales for our economy, totals nearly $380 million annually in state sales tax revenue, and employs 1 in every 15 Texans. One way we stimulate the economy is through designated areas across the state known as cultural districts. These specially identified areas are the arts epicenters of our state, fueling economic development and community vitality. To date, there are 51 cultural districts across the state. That number has nearly doubled since the inception in 2016, and the demand for more cultural districts grows every year. Our cultural districts are performing well beyond expectations. As Madam Chair knows, in the cultural districts in the El Paso area, it's home to the Mission, as well as focused on visual and traditional arts. Houston has 7 cultural districts, highlighting its diverse history, art, music, and theater. San Antonio has 4, celebrating its rich heritage and culture. And Fort Worth's cultural district is home to the Will Rogers Memorial Center, Dickies Arena, and numerous museums. The Texas Commission on the Arts grant funding plays a critical role in establishing and validating the cultural districts. For this reason, the Trust asks you to support exceptional item number 2, increasing cultural district grant funding by $5 million. The Trust is grateful for this opportunity to provide input on the state budget, and we appreciate your support, which helps yield a significant economic impact in our state. And we look forward to your continued support of the Texas arts. And I will take questions, although I may not be able to answer them.
Well, thank you, Nancy, for testimony. Members, any questions?
Thank you, Chair.
I just want to say the cultural art district in my district has been transformative. So thank you for your advocacy.
Thank you. We highlighted those of the subcommittee, but we're proud to have 2 in the Texas Panhandle as well. So
Thank you so much. All right, members. Robert Sardin.
Got it.
Thank you for giving me time to speak. My name is Robert Sarton from far northwest corner of Austin, and thank the chair and the vice chair and the members for giving me some time to speak today. I wanted to be here to thank you for including CPRIT funding in HB 1 and continuing to fund that. I want to speak briefly about why that is a long-term important investment. On October 22nd, 2004, my 4-year-old son was diagnosed with pediatric acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Spoiler alert, he's now 23, living in Denver, starting his career, having graduated from the University of Chicago last spring. But that wasn't, always necessarily the way things were going to come out. When I was a child, that disease was basically a death sentence. Due to ongoing improvements in care, including some stuff they learned from his chemo, The survival rate for that was increased to 85% 5-year relapse-free survival by the time he was diagnosed. It's now a little over 90. But that doesn't come for free. He responded really well to chemotherapy, really low on side effects and immediate, but there are late-term and long-term effects that still affect him to this day. He has peripheral neuropathy that affects his writing, so his writing is a little worse than mine, which is not a super great baseline. And he has reduced math processing speed, which has impacted his ability to take math classes normally. He had to get educational allowances to take untimed tests and the like, though despite that, he managed to get an economics degree from the University of Chicago, which is a rather math-intensive program. He took about 5 times as much calculus as I took to get an engineering degree. He also has a long-term high risk for cardiomyopathy, which would kill him. There's really no treatment for it if it ever comes out. That's due to the anthracyclines they gave him. He was on a study, CCG 1991, that one of the things it did was study how to reduce the treatment so those sorts of risks would not be as great for future patients. This is the sort of work CPRIT is funding, though this study predated CPRIT. In fact, one of the results of that study is age 1 to 10 boys now who get biomarker testing now get 2 years and 2 months of chemotherapy instead of the 3 years and 2 months that he had to go through, which would have been just enough to reduce his anthracycline dosage so that he would be at much lower risk for cardiomyopathy. So I wish we'd had that result beforehand. Spencer and I were guests of our state representative, Mark Strama, at the 2007 State of the State address when then Governor Perry proposed what became CPRIT, and we've been advocates for it really ever since then. The CPRIT has funded initiatives that cover really all 3 of the long-term effects that I talked about. They've done some studies that work on reducing the anthracycline dosage, reducing the amount of peripheral neuropathy going on, and things to look at the drugs that cause the brain damage to children who are getting chemotherapy. So I want to thank you again for the inclusion of the CPRIT funding as it is, and urge you to do what the LBB and Wayne Roberts asked for, and thank you for your time. I can take any questions.
Thank you, Robert, for your story, and for. I'm glad your son is doing a lot better.
Yeah,
members, are there any?
As his brother said, I'm glad Spencer didn't die.
Yes. Any questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ayana Stromberg. Just kidding.
Hi, I woke up this morning with the sty on my eye to make it just a little more unnerving to speak to you all for my first time ever this morning, so please excuse that.
We're friendly.
That being said, I'm so grateful to all of you for the support and continued support that you give cancer research and CPRIT in Texas. In 2017, I was driving my daughter to a funeral to a friend who had just died of lung cancer, and she, at the age of 10, I have 5 children, and she's my second oldest, said to me, "Mom, your cough sounds just like Wendy's," who was the person's funeral who we were attending. So I very quickly went to see many very well-reputed doctors who told me, and I walked in saying, "I'm concerned this is lung cancer." And they told me that if I'd been coughing that long with lung cancer, I would be dead, and that it for sure wasn't lung cancer. And we really pursued it. We saw 7 different specialties, including oncology, pulmonology, infectious disease, and internist. Everybody assured me this was some weird, when they found something on my lung, that it was some kind of scar tissue, because I grew up in South Africa, and I probably had some weird disease as a kid. When I asked for it to be biopsied, I was told that it was, based on the location, it was too dangerous to biopsy it. So fast forward a couple of years, I moved to Austin, and my sister was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so at that time, I went back and saw another oncologist and said, "I'm still coughing, and I'd like to revisit this." And they did another CAT scan, and sure enough, the tumor had grown, and I was diagnosed with non-small cell lung cancer. I've never smoked, and I have 5 young children. And that sort of started a journey for me. I had surgery very quickly at MD Anderson. And much to their surprise, it had already spread, so I had to have chemo. I then was stable for about a year. before it came back in my liver. And I met with the surgeon who told me I was inoperable and basically that I should go home. Thank goodness there was a brand new FDA-approved drug called selpercatinib, which my oncologist informed the surgeon I was eligible for. And so because there was a systemic treatment based on the biomarker testing I had had, they agreed to do the surgery, and I had half my liver removed. Shortly thereafter, we found it in my brain, and I had radiation. I'm doing really well. I'm taking a very targeted drug that I'm able to take because of the biomarker testing that was done early on in my treatment. But people become resistant to that drug between 1 and 3 years typically, and I've been on it for 2 years. So it's frightening, and it's time sensitive, and the work that CPRIT has done will prevent other people from being misdiagnosed. Had I been diagnosed correctly in 2017, I would have been cured. It would have been a surgical cure. And because of the work CPRIT's doing and because of the biomarker testing that we're asking y'all to support, people won't be misdiagnosed as easily, and when they are diagnosed, they will be eligible for targeted treatments that reduce the need for chemo and other more difficult treatments. And in my case, the funding of CPRIT allows them to move research along quicker. So hopefully me and others who are on a time-sensitive treatment will be able to see results and get other options, treatment options, quick enough to stay alive and raise our children. So I really ask that y'all support CPRIT funding and continue to support any funding or biomarker testing support in the state of Texas, because it really makes a difference to individual lives across the state and the country and the world.
Thank you so much for your powerful testimony, and thank you. Members, are there any questions? We are fully funding CPRIT, like what they've asked for, so hopefully we'll continue to support them.
Thank you. I ask for more.
Okay.
Thank you all for the time you put into this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well.
Leo Colas?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chair Gonzalez and members of the House Appropriations Committee. My name is Leo Collis, and I'm a board member with AFSCME, American Federation of State County Municipal Employees, Texas State Retirees. Our 9,000 members spent their professional lives working for state agencies and making Texas the great state that it is. They spend their retirement relying on their ERS pensions to pay for food, gas, housing, and even visits to their children and grandchildren. During my career, I worked in finance as a corporate controller before spending 25 years as a senior systems analyst in the Comptroller of Public Accounts Fiscal Management Division. So I understand the pressures and decisions you face as you write a $289 billion budget. I also understand the needs of the current and retired state employees affected by that budget. Here are the most important things I ask you to remember today. More than 100,000 Texans receive monthly ERS annuities, which have not kept pace with the increased cost of living. Our last COLA came in 2001, and we have not received a 13th check in nearly 25 years. House Bill 1 shows you understand the time has come to invest in ERS and in retired state workers. The base bill pays down the debt in our public pension plans and builds on the good work of Senate Bill 321 from the 87th legislature. We thank you for that support. And Madam Chair, I thank you in particular for fighting so hard for our members for so many years now. With a $33 billion surplus, the legislature has a generational opportunity to do even more than what is laid out in House Bill 1. I'm asking you to consider three things. First, invest in ERS. Texas must maintain and build on the additional funding you approved in 2021 to make ERS actuarially sound and protect our bond rating. Second, approve a cost of living adjustment for all retired state workers so we can start to catch up with the higher prices we have experienced for 2 decades. And third, provide a 13th check for us in 2023, It's been a quarter century since we've had this benefit, which retired teachers have deservedly received multiple times in recent years. Thank you for your support, and for considering these important proposals.
Thank you, Leo. Members, do you have any questions? Thank you for all that you do in your service.
Thank you.
And Bishop.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm Ann Bishop. I'm Executive Director of Texas Public Employees Association. And Texas Public Employees Association represents state employees and retirees throughout their career, much like some of the other organizations that you will hear from today. First of all, I wanted to thank the committee for your time, your service, your effort, as well as your staff. This appropriations bill did not happen overnight. People have spent a lot of time putting it together. We testified at a lot of hearings back in August and October, September and October as well. So we appreciate not only the appropriations staff, but the LBB, as well as the state auditor's office. And you have a lot of great staff on your supporting you. First of all, I'd like to thank you also for filing House Bill 1. It is a great step forward in a number of areas and addresses a lot of needs that have been unmet for a number of years, in particular, employees' retirement system. As a former executive director of employees' retirement system, I know how long it took to get the fund in a position to be actuarially sound and not run out of money. And not only was that addressed initially last session with the main fund, but you're addressing it with the law enforcement officer supplemental fund, as well as the judicial retirement system this session. One of the things that people haven't talked about much, but you'll hear about the need for a COLA or 13th check for retirees. We echo that sentiment. It's been way too long since the cost of living has been able to catch up for retirees. And just so that you know, there is a mechanism in current law right now that when ERS becomes actuarially sound, there is a COLA that is to be given to retirees who have been retired 20 years or more. That COLA, cost of living increase, is 3% or $100 per month, whatever is less. And that will automatically go into effect whenever ERS can afford to do that, and that is before and after the COLA would be given that they remain actuarially sound. But what that does is it creates a tier, or haves and haves not. 20 years or more retirement is certainly a long time to be retired, but so is 19 years. And the way that statute will be implemented is it is not an ongoing thing where once you hit 20 years, you'll receive the cost of living increase or the $100 or 3%, whatever's less, but rather on a certain day, a certain cutoff period, say October 15th. If you're 20 years or more, then you get it. If you're 19 years, 364 days in retirement, you will not get it. So that we ask that you look at that and you consider giving a 13th check to retirees. That would be help with immediate need. It certainly can buy some more time for a cost of living increase where the fund can afford it. Just so that you know, also, retirees aren't rich. I mean, Porter did talk about the average, and I'm not into averages because that means there's highs and lows and a lot of people in between. But this is an average. The average annuity for people over 79 years old is $17,206. and there's 13,442 people. The average annuity for people 75 to 79 is $18,714. So they're not getting rich. They're not living well. This is hard to make ends meet, especially since in the 20 years since there's been a increase of one way or another, the inflation has hit about 60% buying power. Earlier, the chair asked a question, and I appreciated about people leaving the state, whether the impact on people who left the state and kept their money in ERS. There's also another answer to that. It's interesting that that number has grown so much. That certainly shows the turnover and the workforce issues you have with the state. But from a fund perspective, and I suggest that you do verify this with ERS, when people are vested, which there is a small amount of money, a number of people on Porter's slide, that people are vested and leave their money in, eventually they'll age into retirement. They may have been not elected to office or for whatever reason left. When people are not vested, meaning they're not going to get a retirement, and they leave their money into ERS, there's a number of reasons. One is they forget they have it, and then they forget to get it out. But the other opportunity is that ERS does the investment of that money. So they will earn 2% a year, and again, verify this with ERS, by leaving their money into ERS and they not having to invest it themselves or transfer it to a 401k or 457 program. That is a liability for the state because you owe that money. It's their contributions. It's not the state contribution. It's their contribution. So it's their money that they get back. But on the other hand, ERS gets the opportunity to invest and hopefully make more than the 2% in terms of the overall fund. So it's a good and a bad. Is you have the liability that you have to give those people their money back on the books, but on the other hand, you have the opportunity to invest. And since we did transition from retirement to actives, I just want to thank you as well for the inflation-adjusted pay raise for state employees. That has been since 2014. The buying power has degraded 27% since the last inflation-adjusted pay raise, and we do appreciate that. I also want to remind you that as I said before, your LBB and your state auditor and your staff does a wonderful job at giving you information, and there's a lot of information out there. The 5% is certainly appreciated and needed, but there's also the state physician classification plan changes that are in Article 9 that we appreciate the state auditor recommending and the House Bill 1 adopting or proposed to adopt. But part of that is the first step of a two-step process. This is the second step. The first step is to get authority to pay people. The second is the budget. And that's why you'll see people coming and asking for targeted pay raises. Because even though the state auditor recommended a classification change, does not mean these people are automatically paid that salary. And again, there's averages. The state auditor report goes to midpoint, and there's very few people paid at midpoint. There is a legislative workforce summary for each state agency, and you can see how many state agencies are paid below midpoint and how many salaries paid below midpoint and how many people are paid above midpoint. So with that said, I just wanted to remind you of the tools that you have available to make your decisions as you go forward. And I'm always happy to answer any question, and I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your support and effort.
Thanks, Ann. Members, any questions?
Thank you
so much. Tyler, Sheldon?
probably approaching noon, but good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, committee members. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Tyler Sheldon. I'm with the Texas State Employees Union. I just wanted to echo again how thankful we are that you are addressing the exceptional items of ERS and fully funding the legacy payments. As we've heard from multiple agencies, and I'm sure you'll continue to hear, turnover has been a really big problem in the state. And we can address that with things like a pay raise, but we also have the pension benefit, which is a really good recruitment and retention tool that sets the public sector workforce apart from the private sector. So making sure that we continue to strengthen the ERS pension and provide the money necessary helps us in many ways. However, as was mentioned before, we have been neglecting our current retirees. It's been since 2001 since we've seen any kind of cost of living adjustment. As we all know, costs have risen tremendously, especially around Austin and larger cities. But current retirees have lost over 38% of their buying power. That is huge when you're on a fixed income and have served the state of Texas for decades. I mean, many people have retired with 30 years of experience serving the most vulnerable population of the state. And they really deserve to be cared for and to have a dignified retirement. So we strongly urge to look into cost of living adjustments and additional funding for ERS. I know that we have just gotten in with the Senate Bill 321 and the legacy payments. We're just getting to that 31-year actuarially sound period, which allows us to start talking about that. But when it comes to a cost of living adjustment, I mean, it's a matter of livelihoods. Like, I mean, we have a lot of our retirees that are really struggling to make ends meet. So doing it as soon as possible is of the utmost importance. So on top of that, I wanted to thank you for funding the legacy payments for the LECOSORF and JRS2. So making sure that those are actually sound as well. Like I mentioned, those kind of supplemental funds are part of our recruitment package and retention packages as well. So when we're talking, and we'll continue to talk about other ways that we can utilize, particularly LECO, to help with recruitment in other agencies like TJJD. But thank you all very much for your time, and strongly urge you to continue to look for a COLA for, especially with the $33 billion. I know that we're going to be talking about that, but the time is now for retirees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tyler, and thank you for all your advocacy. Members, any questions? Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Richard Jankowski. There we go.
Madam Chair, members, very good on my name. My name is Lieutenant Richard Jankowski. I'm a state trooper stationed out of Victoria, and I am president of the Department of Public Safety Officers Association. I am here to speak in support of the House budget recommendations for the ERS employee retirement system. The health and retirement benefits programs offered through ERS are an investment in the state workforce and help ensure that Texas has the workers needed to provide services Texans rely on daily. DPSOA is thankful for the funding provided for health and retirement benefits, and that the House budget recommendations include the addition of funds to address unfunded liabilities and cover the normal costs of the law enforcement and custodial officers supplemental retirement plan. We greatly appreciate the commitment of $1 billion for a one-time legacy payment to ERS. These investments will help move ERS towards actuarial soundness and provide comfort to employees and retirees that our pension system is secure. We would also strongly support a 13th check or cost of living adjustment for retirees if the committee decides additional funds are available for this item. Again, we thank you for your leadership and stewardship on pension and health benefits for state employees and look forward to continuing to work with you this session.
Thank you so much. Members, any questions? I just want to say thank you for your service and
Thank you.
all the guys, women, and people out there.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. And I want to first express my appreciation for your service to the people of Texas. And I say that to the returning members and to the new members. I looked at all your biographies, and somewhere in your past, recent past, I see a lot of public service already on your part, and we appreciate that. In that service, I'm sure one time or another, maybe more often than not, you've dealt with issues where there are priorities, setting of priorities, maybe even conflicting priorities, and a lot of times that has to do with money. I'm here today as president of the Retired State Employees Association. You've heard from some other great testimony from my colleagues in the other associations on behalf of current employees and retirees. And I'm here to associate myself with those comments. The unique situation that you're in is not something that the legislature often sees, is an opportunity with revenues to maybe catch up on some things and to maybe shore up some things and maybe even get ahead of the curve. So I think in the next few weeks, as you go through this budget process, I encourage you to keep juggling those priorities in mind. I have one perspective to share with you. Our organization has three priorities: get the fund actuarially sound and keep it there. Number two, keep the insurance program intact as it is, at least. And I think you've heard some good testimony from ERS today about how that's in good shape. But if there were ever a reduction in the benefits to insurance, that would it be interpreted or translated into essentially a reduction in that monthly annuity. So that's why those two things kind of need to work together. Our third priority has always been to enhance and increase the voice of retirees before the legislature and at ERS. And we're happy that last session a bill passed that allows a retiree to run for one of the three elected positions on the board. So that'll be coming up this year. I won't exceed my 5 minutes, Madam Chair. The decision that may come before you is the long-term viability of the fund is very important, and that's been as I say, our priority: get the fund and keep it there. That's the long term, and we've advocated that for a number of years, and certainly the passage of Senate Bill 321 really got us on that path. Also, the legacy funding of $1 billion last biennium and the continuation of it in this next biennium will be important to get us where we need to be. The opportunity that I think you may see in the coming weeks, and you're beginning to hear testimony about it, is if we can accelerate that long-term plan to get the fund actually sound sooner. Not only do we get it there, but it's at the savings of $5 billion to the taxpayers. So paying in advance is a lot better than paying afterwards. So that's my judgment. You'll have to look at that. But at the same time, in the short term, you're also hearing, and I think this is important to think about, is that without, facing inflation, et cetera, over not just the last 20 some odd years, but the recent few years. So there is something that can be done possibly there. We don't normally talk about at RSEA about a 13th check because we're committed to the long-term plan. But we think with the revenue situation and the leadership we've had from Comptroller Hager, that you've got a unique situation that you may not see very often. So I urge you to be able to juggle those priorities and make your recommendations accordingly. Thank you very much. I'll yield to any questions.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for your advocacy, and it's an important issue to all of us. Members, are there any questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, is there anybody else who'd like to testify on any of the agencies we've heard today? Seeing none, members, thank you for a great first meeting. We have, guess what? We get to do this all again tomorrow, 8 a.m. here, same place, same time, and we will hear from the remaining of Article 1 agencies. Are there any questions before we adjourn? Seeing none and having no further business, and if there is no objection, the House Appropriations Subcommittee in Articles 1, 4, and 5 stands adjourned.